I've always been drawn to the edges of things, the places where the maps get fuzzy and the human footprint fades. That's why at 28, I found myself spending more time in the backcountry than in my own apartment. I was a freelance nature photographer, chasing light and shadow, and usually the more remote the location, the better the shot. I trekked through the Rockies, navigated the dense woods of the Pacific Northwest, and even spent a season documenting wildlife in Alaska. I wasn't reckless, not really. Just confident in my abilities, maybe a little overconfident, as most of us are in our 20s. This particular trip was to the Whispering Pines Valley, a place known more for its legends than its visitors. Tucked deep in a lesser-known mountain range, it was a full day's hike from the nearest trailhead, and that trailhead was already 2 hours from the last paved road. Cell service was a joke, a fading memory from another life, which was exactly what I wanted. I'd heard rumors about the valley, old wives' tales mostly, about strange atmospheric conditions, but mostly it was just pristine, untouched wilderness. Perfect for capturing the last gasp of autumn color before winter locked everything down. My plan was simple. Hike in, set up a base camp by the old ranger's cabin, long abandoned but still offering a bit of shelter, and spend 3 days exploring the deeper reaches of the valley. I packed light but smart, a good tent, a sturdy cooking kit, plenty of dehydrated meals, and enough camera gear to weigh me down but make every shot count. I also had my old hunting knife strapped to my belt, more for utility than defense, and a heavy-duty flashlight. It was early October, which meant crisp days, but the nights would be cold and the weather could turn on a dime. I'd checked the forecast, of course, clear skies for the duration. That's where my first and perhaps biggest mistake lay, trusting a forecast when you're pushing into the truly wild. I arrived at the cabin just as the sun began to dip, painting the sky in fiery oranges and deep purples. It was more dilapidated than I remembered from my last visit 2 years ago, but still solid enough for storage. I quickly pitched my tent beside it, opting for my own sleeping arrangements over the questionable floorboards. The air was still, thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. A perfectly normal autumn evening, the kind that soothes the soul after a long day's trek. I boiled water for a quick dinner, humming to myself, feeling that familiar satisfaction of solitude and self-reliance. As darkness truly settled, a peculiar quiet descended upon the valley. Not the usual comforting quiet of the wilderness, filled with the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, or the skittering of small nocturnal creatures. No, this was a deeper, more profound silence. It was the kind of quiet that felt less like an absence of sound and more like a presence of nothing. The trees stood motionless, their branches like skeletal fingers against the inky sky. I stopped chewing my jerky, holding my breath, straining my ears. Nothing, not even the chirping of crickets. It was as if every living thing around me had collectively decided to pause, or worse, to hold its breath. A shiver traced its way down my spine, unrelated to the cooling air. I told myself it was just the isolation playing tricks on me, the unfamiliar quiet after a day of exertion. I shone my flashlight around the immediate perimeter of my camp, the beam cutting through the oppressive darkness, searching for any sign of movement, any explanation for this sudden, unnatural hush. There was nothing, just the silent, waiting trees. My gut, usually a reliable barometer for genuine unease, was starting to tighten. It was subtle, just a whisper of wrongness, but it was there. And then I felt it. A single, almost imperceptible drop of moisture landed on my forehead, cool and soft. I looked up, expecting the first signs of a stray cloud, maybe a drizzle. But the sky above me was still utterly clear, studded with a million indifferent stars. And as I watched, another drop, then another, instead of falling, seemed to hesitate, hanging in the air for a fraction of a second before slowly, impossibly drifting upward, vanishing into the darkness above. My breath hitched, a cold knot tightening in my chest. The first upward drifting drops had been a trick of the light, a figment of my weary mind, I told myself. But then another, larger droplet landed on my cheek, undeniably cool and wet, before defying every law of physics I knew. It quivered, a tiny sphere of liquid mercury, clinging to my skin for a heartbeat, then slowly, deliberately began to ascend. It peeled away from my face, a miniature teardrop rising, not falling, and dissolved into the blackness above as if it had never been. My rational mind, the part that organized camera settings and planned supply routes, screamed for an explanation. Condensation, static electricity, some localized air current so bizarre it created a microinversion, but the air was still heavy and unmoving, and the sky above was a canvas of sharp, indifferent stars, untroubled by clouds or atmospheric disturbances. This wasn't a weather anomaly, this was something else. I scrambled to my feet, my dinner forgot, the metallic taste of fear coating my tongue. My flashlight beam, usually a comforting sentinel, felt inadequate, a thin blade against an ocean of darkness. I swept it frantically across the empty ground, up the trunks of the silent pines, then with a gulp, directly upwards. The beam cut a tunnel into the inky blackness, illuminating only more stars, more emptiness. Yet as I stared into the void, I saw them. More droplets, faint, almost translucent, were now visible within the cone of light, slowly, steadily, rising. They were not falling from above, they were emerging from the very air around me, coalescing out of nothingness before beginning their impossible journey skyward. It was like watching a film in reverse, the rain re-entering the clouds. Only there were no clouds. The silence that had settled earlier felt even more profound now, pressing in on my ears, a physical weight. My own breathing sounded impossibly loud, ragged, and shallow. I took a step back, my foot catching on a loose root, sending a jolt of adrenaline through me. My mind raced, searching for any logical precursor. The rumors of strange atmospheric conditions in the valley, were these what they meant? But strange felt like an understatement. This was an affront to reality. I fumbled for my phone, a useless reflex in a valley renowned for its dead zones. No signal, of course, not even a flicker of hope. I needed to document this to prove it wasn't a waking dream. My camera, an expensive DSLR with a wide-angle lens, was in its weather-sealed bag, only a few feet away inside my tent. I hesitated. Moving towards the tent felt like turning my back on the inexplicable, exposing myself further. But the urge to capture it, to have undeniable proof, was stronger than the growing dread. Taking a deep breath, I kept my flashlight trained upwards, watching the silent, rising tiers of the valley. Then a quick dash, I ducked into the tent. The familiar smell of nylon and sleeping bag insulation was a momentary comfort. I unzipped the camera bag with trembling fingers, pulled out the DSLR, and attached a fast lens. My hands shook as I adjusted the ISO, opened the aperture wide, and tried to focus on the impossible. Stepping back out, the scene was unchanged. The upward rain continued, ghostly and silent. I raised the camera, aiming into the beam of my flashlight, trying to catch the elusive droplets. Click, click, click. The shutter sound, usually a welcome affirmation, felt like a jarring intrusion in the profound quiet. I reviewed the images on the camera's small screen. Blurry points of light mostly. Not definitive proof, but enough to show something was there, defying gravity. A new sensation pricked at my skin, a subtle tingling like static electricity before a storm. It wasn't painful, but it was omnipresent, a hum beneath my senses. The air itself seemed to vibrate, a low-frequency thrum that I felt more than heard. The silence, therefore, was even more terrifying. It was a silence that contained sound, a void that was nevertheless full. My eyes darted around the perimeter of my small camp. The old ranger's cabin, a dark silhouette against the fainter dark of the trees, seemed to loom larger, its vacant windows like empty eyes. Had I heard a creak, a rustle from within its decaying walls, or was it just my imagination now running wild? I shone the flashlight at the cabin, its beam illuminating the weathered timber, the broken panes of glass. Nothing. Just an abandoned structure, holding its breath like everything else. The tingling intensified, crawling up my arms, across my scalp. My hair felt like it was standing on end. I lowered the camera, my attention now fully consumed by this new, unsettling development. It was as if the air was alive, charged with an invisible energy. Then, just as my anxiety reached a fever pitch, a low, guttural moan echoed from the cabin. It wasn't human, it wasn't animal. It was a sound that seemed to emanate from the very timbers of the structure itself, a deep, resonant groan of ancient wood under immense, unseen pressure. It was long, drawn out, and filled with a sorrowful emptiness that chilled me to the bone. My flashlight beam snapped back to the cabin, shaking violently in my grasp. The sound died away, leaving an even deeper silence in its wake, if that were possible. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum in the oppressive quiet. This was no longer just strange weather. This was wrong, fundamentally, disturbingly wrong. My instincts screamed at me to run, to pack up and get out of the valley, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. The primal fear was warring with the photographer's curiosity, the explorer's stubborn refusal to abandon a mystery. I forced myself to breathe, to think, what could make an abandoned cabin moan? Wind, but there was no wind. Structural shifting, perhaps, but the sound had been too organic, too vocal. It had been a sound of suffering. Then a flicker, a faint, almost imperceptible light at one of the cabin's windows. Not a steady light, but a brief internal glow, as if something within had momentarily illuminated. It was gone before I could fully process it, leaving me questioning if I had even seen it at all. My hand, still gripping the flashlight, was soaked with sweat. I swallowed hard, the dryness in my throat making it difficult. "Hello," I called out, my voice thin and reedy, instantly swallowed by the vast, silent night. The sound felt foolish, a tiny pebble dropped into an infinite ocean. No reply, only the constant, silent ascent of the impossible rain. I took a tentative step towards the cabin, then another. My brain, despite the fear, was trying to rationalize. A squatter, unlikely in a place this remote. An animal, perhaps, but what kind of animal would make a wooden cabin groan and then flicker a light? The more I tried to explain, the less sense it made. As I drew closer, the tingling sensation intensified further, becoming almost painful. It felt like needles pricking my skin, hundreds of invisible points of pressure. The air grew heavy, thick with an unidentifiable scent, a mix of ozone, damp earth, and something metallic like old blood. My vision blurred for a moment, and I swayed, a wave of nausea washing over me. I pressed a hand to my forehead, fighting the dizziness. This valley, whatever it was doing, was actively trying to disorient me. I reached the front of the cabin, my hand on the rusted latch of the main door. It was old, swollen with damp, and resisted my efforts to open it. I pressed my ear to the rough-hewn wood. Silence, absolute, impenetrable silence from within. My heart thrummed against my ribs, a trapped bird. With a grunt of effort, I pushed harder, forcing the door inward. It scraped open with a sound like a tortured scream, revealing a gaping maw of darkness. The air inside was stale and cold, heavy with the scent of decay and something else, something cloying and sickly sweet. I swept my flashlight beam across the interior. Dust motes danced in the light, thick as snow. Old, rotting furniture lay scattered, draped in cobwebs. A table, overturned chairs, a collapsed bed frame. The usual detritus of an abandoned dwelling. But it was the far corner that drew my eye, a section of wall where the timber seemed unnaturally dark, almost charred, despite no obvious signs of fire damage. And on the floor directly beneath it, a faint, iridescent sheen like an oil slick. I stepped inside, my hiking boots crunching on ancient dust and splintered wood. The air grew colder, the tingling more pronounced. The metallic sweet scent was stronger here, almost overwhelming. I knelt, shining my light on the iridescent patch. It wasn't oil. It was a viscous fluid, slowly pooling, glinting with impossible colors in the flashlight beam. And it was slowly, almost imperceptibly, rising. Like the droplets outside, this thicker fluid was also defying gravity, though at a much slower pace, creeping up the wall, leaving a faint, shimmering trail. My mind reeled. This wasn't some natural phenomenon. This was supernatural, or something entirely beyond current scientific understanding. My hand hovered over the fluid, a morbid curiosity overriding my fear. What was it? I resisted the urge to touch it. There was no telling what this alien substance might do. As I straightened up, my gaze fell upon an old wooden chest in the opposite corner, half hidden under a tattered canvas tarp. It was remarkably well preserved compared to the rest of the cabin's contents. A strange compulsion drew me to it. I pulled back the tarp, revealing a heavy, iron-bound chest scarred with age. There was no lock, only a simple, rusted clasp. My fingers trembled as I unlatched it. Inside, nestled on a bed of dry, crumbling straw, lay a collection of objects that seemed utterly out of place. A compass, its needle spinning wildly despite my efforts to hold it steady. A small, tarnished silver locket engraved with symbols I didn't recognize, symbols that seemed to writhe and shift under my gaze. And a journal, a thick, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. This was it, a clue, a connection to the valley's past and perhaps to whatever was happening now. I pulled out the journal carefully, not wanting to damage its fragile binding. The cover was blank, save for a faint, almost invisible impression of the same symbols from the locket. I opened it, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and anticipation. The handwriting was neat, precise, but faded. The language was English, thankfully. The first entry was dated October 12, 1947, 76 years ago. This was the Ranger's journal then. I began to read, my flashlight beam illuminating the fragile script. October 12, 1947. Another transfer, another forgotten posting. Whispering Pines Valley. The name sounds idyllic enough, but I've been here a week and already the quiet is unnerving. Not the usual wilderness quiet, mind you, but a sort of hollow stillness. The old-timers down in town spoke of odd atmospheric conditions, of compasses spinning wild, but I'm a man of science, a man of order. I'll keep my post, watch the forest, and log my observations. So far, only a curious lack of wildlife. Not a single deer track, not a squirrel chatter, just the pines whispering to themselves. I paused, a shiver running through me, the same profound quiet, the wild compass. My own compass in my pack was probably spinning like crazy. I flipped a few pages, eager to get to the odd atmospheric conditions. October 15, 1947. The silence persists. It's growing heavier, pressing in. Last night I noticed the dew. It formed as usual, but as the sun began to warm the air, it didn't evaporate. Instead, I watched with my own two eyes as droplets of water lifted from the leaves, slowly, impossibly, ascending into the clear morning sky. I dismissed it as an optical illusion, a trick of the light and the thin mountain air. But this morning, it happened again. I've tested my instruments. Barometer is steady, thermometer is normal. There is no explanation. The upward rain, my breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just my experience. This was a pattern, something that had happened before, decades ago. The Ranger had seen it too. October 18, 1947. It's getting worse. The upward flow of water is more pronounced. I spent hours today watching it. It's not just dew now. It coalesces from the very air, forms into droplets and rises. And the air, it's charged, a constant hum that I feel in my teeth, a tingling on my skin. My compass is utterly useless, spinning ceaselessly. My watch has stopped twice. The radio is dead air, only static, no matter the frequency. It's as if the valley itself is becoming insulated, cut off from the outside world by an invisible barrier. I felt a sudden, profound chill. Insulated, cut off, that's exactly how I felt. My phone, my watch, the absolute lack of any external sound. I was living his past. October 20, 1947. I heard it tonight, a moan from the cabin itself, a sound of immense sorrow and strain. I looked out but saw nothing, yet the sound was real. And afterwards, a flicker of light from within my own quarters, though I had no lamps lit. I am alone here, yet I feel watched. The air is thick with a strange, metallic odor like blood and lightning. The groan, the flicker of light, the smell, he had experienced it all. This journal was a chilling mirror. I skipped ahead, desperate for answers, for any indication of what this phenomenon was or how it ended. October 23, 1947. I found the symbol. It's etched into the old oak near the spring. The same symbol I found on the locket in the chest, the one my grandfather always warned me about. He was a local, swore this valley had a thinness about it. He called it the veil, said sometimes it opened and things came through. He spoke of the husk, beings that fed on the life force that rose with the water, that made the air heavy and silent. A shiver, deeper and more profound than any before, racked my body. The veil, the husk, this wasn't just a natural phenomenon. This was folklore, a local legend given horrifying life. My pragmatic, scientific mind rebelled, but my eyes had seen the impossible and my ears had heard the unnatural. October 25, 1947. The trees are changing, not just autumn, but something else. The leaves, even the ones still green, are growing brittle, almost crystalline. They shimmer with an internal light, and the sap, it's flowing upwards. I watched it today, oozing from a pine, then slowly, impossibly, drawing itself back into the tree, climbing against gravity. The metallic fluid on the cabin floor is spreading, too. It pulses faintly with that same internal light. I believe it is the sap. The very essence of the valley is being drawn upwards, harvested. My gaze snapped to the glistening, iridescent pool on the floor, then to the charred-looking wall where it was slowly creeping upwards. The sap, the life force, and the trees outside, the silent pines, were they too undergoing this unnatural transformation? October 27, 1947. They are here, I see them. Not with my eyes, not directly, but in the periphery of my vision at the edge of the light. Shadows that are darker than shadow moving between the trees. They are drawn to the light, the faint internal glow of the trees, the shimmering sap, and the fluid. It's not just sap, it's what they leave behind. The husks, they feed on the life, on the very essence of this place. They ascend with the water, taking the life force with them. And the silence, it's not empty, it's full of them watching. I slammed the journal shut, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped it. Husks, beings, shadows that were darker than shadow, this was too much. My carefully constructed reality, built on logic and tangible evidence, was crumbling around me. I looked at the chest, then at the locket, the symbols. What did they mean? A warning, a protection? The compass, still spinning wildly in the chest, seemed to mock my confusion. A sudden, sharp crack echoed from outside the cabin. Not a branch snapping, but something sharper, more deliberate. I froze, every muscle tensed. Was it one of them? A husk? I crept to the door, peering through a crack in the frame. The upward drifting droplets were still there, illuminated by the faint glow of the stars and my own forgotten flashlight. But now in the space between the silent, unmoving trees there were shapes, vague, indistinct, shifting forms that seemed to absorb the starlight rather than reflect it. They were not solid, not quite shadow, but something that defied definition. They moved with a slow, deliberate grace, flowing through the forest like ink through water, and they were getting closer to my camp, closer to the cabin. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I stumbled back from the door, my mind racing. The journal, the ranger, he must have left it here for a reason. A warning. But what had happened to him? The last entry was brief, just 2 days after he saw them. October 29, 1947. They are at the cabin. I can feel their presence pressing against the walls. They want the light. They want the essence. I must leave this journal. Someone must know. The veil is open. They are coming for... The writing abruptly stopped, a final, frantic scribble trailing off the page. He hadn't finished the entry. What had happened to him? Had he escaped? Or had he become one of them, his life force harvested, his essence drawn upwards? I clutched the journal to my chest, my mind reeling with the horrifying implications. I wasn't just observing a strange phenomenon, I was trapped in a 76-year-old nightmare. The valley wasn't just remote, it was a trap. My gaze fell upon my camera, lying on the dusty floor where I dropped it in my haste. Documentation. Proof. The very thing that had brought me to the edges of the map was now confirming my deepest fears. I had to get out, but how? The valley was insulated, the journal said, cut off. What did that mean for escape? Could I just walk out, or were these husks, these shadowy entities, guarding the exit? My flashlight flickered, then dimmed alarmingly. The batteries were fresh, but the valley's strange energy was clearly affecting everything. Panic flared, cold and sharp. Without light, I was truly blind against these shadows darker than shadow. I fumbled for my spare batteries in my pack, my fingers clumsy with terror. As I replaced them, the cabin groaned again, a deeper, more resonant sound this time, making the very floorboards vibrate beneath my feet. And then from somewhere close, just outside the cabin, a new sound. A soft, rhythmic scraping, like something dragging itself across the rough ground. Slowly, deliberately, moving towards the cabin door. My eyes darted to the door, then to the windows. No escape through them. They were too small, too high, and boarded up in places. The door was my only way out, but it was also their way in. I backed away from the door, my hand instinctively going to the hunting knife strapped to my belt. It felt laughably inadequate against shadows darker than shadow, but it was all I had. The scraping sound stopped directly outside the door. Then a new sound, faint at first, then growing louder, a soft, insistent tapping. Not a knock, but a delicate, almost exploratory tap, tap, tap against the aged wood right where my hand had been moments before. It was searching. My breath caught in my throat. I could feel their presence now, not just as a tingling in the air, but as a cold, predatory awareness pressing against the cabin's flimsy walls. They were outside, waiting, testing. I retreated further into the cabin, my back against the far wall opposite the door. My eyes scanned the interior, desperate for a hidden exit, a weapon, anything. My flashlight beam danced across the decaying furniture, the cobwebbed corners. Nothing, just the relics of a forgotten life, now a tomb. The tapping stopped, a moment of chilling silence. Then a new sound directly above me, a faint scuttling on the roof, followed by a soft thud. They weren't just at the door, they were all around. I looked up, my flashlight beam piercing the gloom of the attic space. Nothing but dusty rafters and forgotten beams. But the sensation of being watched was overwhelming, suffocating. I felt their invisible eyes on me, evaluating, assessing. The air inside the cabin became colder, dropping several degrees in an instant. My breath plumed in front of me. The sweet, metallic scent grew stronger, mixed now with something else, a faint, earthy smell like a newly opened grave. My stomach churned. Suddenly, a loud thud from the roof directly over my head made me jump. Plaster dust rained down. Whatever was up there was heavy, moving with purpose. Then a low, drawn-out hiss seemed to emanate from the ceiling, a sound that made my teeth ache. It was not a snake, not an animal. It was a sound of ancient malevolence, of hunger. I knew with terrifying certainty that I couldn't stay in the cabin. It was a cage, not a sanctuary. The ranger had tried to warn someone. He had left the journal. He had faced them. Had he fought? Had he run? I had to choose, fight or flee. And fleeing in this valley felt like a fool's hope, but staying here felt like certain death. I looked at the small, sturdy backpack containing my emergency supplies, my satellite messenger, useless, but a symbol of hope, and my remaining dehydrated food. I had to make it to that pack. I had to get out. The front door groaned again, and this time the rusted latch visibly vibrated, as if something was pushing hard from the outside. The wood around the latch splintered a fraction, dust motes shaking loose. They were trying to get in. My mind went back to the journal. They are drawn to the light. My flashlight, my camera screen, anything that glowed. I clicked off my flashlight, plunging the cabin into absolute darkness. The sudden, oppressive blackness was terrifying. My eyes, accustomed to the beam, struggled to adjust. Every creak, every rustle, every imagined movement became magnified. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird desperate to escape its cage. I strained my ears, listening for the sounds outside. The scraping had stopped. The tapping had stopped. The thudding on the roof had stopped. Only the low, almost imperceptible hum of the charged air remained, a constant, irritating vibration in my bones. Had they gone, or were they just waiting, adapting to the sudden darkness? The silence was thicker now, a suffocating blanket. I fumbled for my knife, pulling it from its sheath. The cold steel felt solid, a small comfort in the overwhelming terror. I held it in front of me, point outward, ready for what? A shadow, a form that defied form. My eyes slowly began to adjust to the faint ambient starlight filtering through the gaps in the cabin's walls and the broken windows. Shapes began to emerge from the gloom, the overturned table, the skeletal bed frame, the ominous, dark patch on the far wall. The iridescent fluid on the floor still shimmered faintly, a beacon of unnatural light. I took a cautious step, then another, moving towards my backpack. Each movement felt like traversing a minefield. The air was heavy, thick with the unidentifiable scent. My senses were on hyper-alert, every nerve ending screaming. As I reached the corner where my backpack lay, a low, almost inaudible whisper seemed to slither through the air, right next to my ear. It wasn't a language I recognized, just a soft, drawn-out sibilance, like wind through dry reeds, but distinctly intelligent, distinctly close. I spun around, knife raised, heart leaping into my throat. Nothing. The darkness was absolute save for the faint glow of the fluid on the floor, but the whisper had been real. I felt its echo in the very core of my being, a promise of impending doom. My hand closed around the strap of my backpack. I yanked it towards me, pulling it close to my body. I couldn't risk leaving it. It had my remaining food, my survival gear, and the ranger's journal. That journal felt like a lifeline, a guide to whatever horror I was facing. Another whisper, this time from the far side of the cabin, echoing the first. Then another, closer, from the roof. They were communicating, or circling, or both. I had to move out of the cabin, into the open, however terrifying that seemed. The cabin felt like a trap, a funnel for their attention. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I made my decision. I would make a break for it, head back the way I came, towards the trailhead. Even if it was miles, even if it was dangerous, it was better than waiting here to be harvested. I crept towards the door, my backpack slung over one shoulder, my knife clutched in my other hand. My eyes strained in the darkness, trying to perceive any movement, any change in the subtle interplay of shadow and faint light. The iridescent fluid on the floor seemed to pulse now, a slow, deliberate beat, a silent heartbeat in the heart of this dead valley. As I neared the door, a sudden, bright flash of light erupted directly outside, so blinding that I cried out and instinctively shielded my eyes. It wasn't a natural light, it was a cold, alien blue like superheated plasma, and it hummed with an intense, almost painful energy. The cabin walls vibrated violently, splintering wood cracking with sharp reports. The air shrieked, a sound of tearing fabric. When I dared to lower my arm, my eyes adjusting to the afterimage, I saw it. The blue light pulsed rhythmically through the gaps in the doorframe, illuminating the thick dust motes within the cabin. And silhouetted against that impossible blue light, framed in the widening crack of the door, was a shape. It wasn't human, it wasn't animal. It was a tall, impossibly thin figure, composed of shadows that seemed to absorb the blue light, making it even darker than the deepest night. Its limbs were elongated, spindly, ending in delicate, multi-jointed digits that seemed to caress the wood of the doorframe. There was no discernible head, no features, just an undulating, shadowy mass where a face should be, framed by an ethereal, almost crystalline halo that shimmered with the same upward drifting moisture. It seemed to float, not stand, its form a constant play of density and dissipation. This was a husk, the ranger's words screamed through my mind, shadows that are darker than shadow. Its presence was a physical force pressing against me, stealing the very air from my lungs. A low, resonant hum like distant thunder emanated from its form, filling the cabin, vibrating through my bones. I felt a profound sense of emptiness, of vital energy being drawn from me like a siphon. My knees buckled and I fell to one knee, gasping for breath, the knife still clutched in my weakening hand. The husk moved slowly, gracefully. One of its elongated digits, impossibly thin and dark, slipped through the crack in the door, probing the interior. It stretched, a tendril of darkness, slowly reaching towards the iridescent fluid pooling on the floor. It seemed to taste the air, its movements precise and deliberate. I was trapped, utterly, irrevocably trapped. My flight instinct, usually so powerful, was paralyzed by the sheer alien horror of the creature. This wasn't a bear or a mountain lion. This was something from another dimension, a living embodiment of the void. Then, as the shadowy tendril touched the shimmering fluid, the blue light outside flared even brighter, and the creature's form seemed to intensify, growing denser, more substantial. The hum deepened, and I felt a wave of dizziness so potent that the cabin spun around me. My vision blurred, and the edges of my awareness started to fray. I knew with chilling clarity that this was how the ranger had disappeared. This was the moment of harvest. But a flicker of defiance, a primal surge of self-preservation ignited within me. I was a photographer, an explorer, not prey. I had faced danger before, not like this, no, never like this. But I would not go down without a fight, even if it was a futile one. With a roar that was more defiance than courage, I scrambled to my feet, bracing myself. I still had the journal, I still had the knife, and I still had a burning will to survive. The blue light intensified, the hum reached a deafening crescendo, and the husk, sensing my resistance, turned its featureless face towards me, its form seeming to condense, to solidify, its silent gaze a chilling vacuum. The air thickened, heavy with the weight of its alien hunger, pressing in on me, suffocating me, drawing the very life from my soul. The air thickened, heavy with the weight of its alien hunger, pressing in on me, suffocating me, drawing the very life from my soul. My vision tunneled, the blue light outside the door becoming a blinding ring around the encroaching darkness of the husk. My strength failed, and I felt my grip on the knife loosening. This wasn't a fight I could win with steel and will. This was an entity that fed on existence itself. But something within me, a stubborn, irrational spark, refused to yield. The ranger's journal, pressed against my back by the backpack, felt like a burning coal, a testament to a previous struggle, a desperate plea for understanding. He hadn't just given up, he had tried to warn. With a final, desperate gasp, I remembered his words about the locket, the same symbol I found on the locket in the chest, the one my grandfather always warned me about. A warning, a possible protection. It was a wild, desperate thought, but in that moment of utter terror, any sliver of hope felt like a mountain. My free hand, trembling, fumbled into the open chest behind me, blindly searching through the crumbling straw. My fingers brushed against the cool metal of the compass, then the smooth, tarnished silver of the locket. I pulled it out, clutching it in my palm. It was cold, strangely heavy. The symbols on its surface, once just curious engravings, now pulsed faintly, a subtle, almost imperceptible warmth against my skin. The husk, its shadowy tendril still reaching for the iridescent fluid on the floor, paused. Its form, which had been growing denser, seemed to waver, a ripple passing through its otherwise absolute darkness. The blue light outside flickered, the hum dropping in pitch, becoming a low, questioning growl. It had noticed the locket. This wasn't a weapon, not in the traditional sense, but it was something. Something the ranger's grandfather had warned about, something connected to the veil. A desperate gambit formed in my mind. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, took a deep, shuddering breath, and then, with all the remaining strength I possessed, I hurled the locket at the husk. It wasn't a powerful throw, my arm weakened by fear and the creature's draining presence, but it was direct. The locket flew, a glint of silver in the blue-tinged gloom, and struck the shadowy tendril that extended through the door crack. The impact was minimal, no sound of metal on flesh, for there was no flesh, but the reaction was instantaneous and violent. The husk recoiled as if struck by lightning. The blue light outside the cabin flared into a blinding supernova, then abruptly died, plunging the world into a momentary, absolute blackness. The intense hum became a shriek, a sound of pure agony that tore through the cabin, rattling the very foundations. The air vibrated so violently that plaster dust rained down like a sudden snowfall. The metallic sweet scent intensified to an unbearable degree, stinging my nostrils and throat. I staggered back, covering my ears, my eyes squeezed shut. The shriek was agonizing, a sound designed to shatter sanity. I felt the cabin itself begin to tear apart. Wood groaned, splintered, and cracked with terrifying finality. I heard the deafening roar of timbers giving way, of something massive being ripped apart. Then, as suddenly as it began, the shriek cut off. The vibrations ceased. The cabin, which had been threatening to collapse, seemed to settle, though I could hear new creaks and groans from its damaged structure. Silence, not the oppressive, watching silence from before, but a jarring, ringing emptiness. My ears throbbed, my heart pounded a frantic rhythm. I slowly opened my eyes, blinking away the afterimages. The cabin was a shambles. The door where the husk had been was no longer merely cracked. It was a gaping hole, torn violently from its frame, flung inward onto the floor. Splintered wood and rusty hinges lay scattered like forgotten bones. Outside, the blue light was gone. The only illumination came from the faint starlight, now appearing almost normal. The husk was gone. Or had it just retreated? My gaze darted frantically to the hole where the door had been, then to the windows, then to the roof. Nothing, no shadows darker than shadow. The deep, oppressive cold still lingered, and the metallic sweet scent hung heavy in the air, but the predatory presence was gone. The upward drifting droplets, though still shimmered faintly, silently rising into the clear night sky, a stark reminder that the fundamental wrongness of the valley persisted. I pushed myself up, my legs trembling, my muscles screaming in protest. The adrenaline was starting to fade, leaving me weak and disoriented. My hand still clutched the hunting knife, but it felt absurdly useless now. The locket was nowhere to be seen, lost in the chaos. I peered cautiously out the gaping doorway. The area directly outside was strangely clear. The vague, indistinct shapes I had seen earlier between the trees were gone. Only the silent, ancient pines stood, their branches still and skeletal against the starry canvas. It felt like the valley was holding its breath, waiting for the next horrifying act. This was my chance. Escape now. I clutched my backpack tighter, making sure the ranger's journal was secure. It was a terrifying prospect to step out into the unknown, but staying in the now compromised cabin felt like inviting another encounter, another harvest. Taking one last look at the iridescent fluid slowly creeping up the charred wall, a chilling testament to the husk's presence, I stepped out of the cabin. The ground was cold and damp beneath my boots. The air, though still charged, felt less suffocating, less actively malevolent. My flashlight, which I had clicked off in a desperate attempt to hide, was still off. I kept it that way. They are drawn to the light. The phrase from the journal echoed in my mind. Even the faint internal glow of the trees, the shimmering sap, had drawn them. I was a much brighter beacon. Navigating in near-total darkness under the faint starlight was a challenge. My eyes, still adjusting, struggled to pick out details. Every rustle of leaves, a sound that was now terrifyingly present after the absolute silence, made me jump. Every shadow seemed to shift, to coalesce into something monstrous. My imagination, already frayed, was working overtime. I had to move quickly but silently. The path back to the trailhead was long, a full day's hike. In the darkness, with unknown entities lurking, it would be an odyssey. I focused on the immediate task, putting as much distance as possible between myself and the cabin. I walked with extreme caution, my knife still clutched, ready for something I couldn't even define. My senses were hyper-alert. The faint, high-frequency hum in the air was still there, a constant reminder of the valley's unnatural state. The upward drifting droplets were still visible in the scattered starlight, a silent, impossible rain. After what felt like an hour of tense, painstaking movement, placing each footstep with deliberate care, I realized I was making painfully slow progress. The fear of making noise, of drawing attention, was paralyzing. I kept picturing the husk, its featureless form, its elongated digits, its silent, draining hunger. I needed to push harder, even at the risk of noise. Survival depended on it. I picked up my pace, moving from a slow creep to a hurried walk, my boots crunching on fallen leaves and twigs. The sounds felt deafening in the profound quiet of the forest. I imagined their shadowy forms flowing silently between the trees, keeping pace with me, just out of sight, waiting. The deeper I went into the forest, the more I noticed the strange transformation the ranger had described. The trees weren't just still. Their leaves, even in the darkness, seemed to possess a faint internal luminescence. Not a glow, not exactly, but a subtle vibrancy that made them stand out from the absolute blackness of normal shadow. It was as if they were slowly becoming crystalline, as if light was trapped within their very structure. And the air, though less suffocating than at the cabin, still carried that peculiar, sweet metallic scent. My compass, which I had forgotten about until now, was in my backpack. I knew it would be useless, but the thought spurred me to check my watch. Dead, the ranger had noted his watch stopping. The valley's energy was still disrupting electronics. My satellite messenger, my last desperate hope for contact, was probably also useless. I cursed myself for trusting a forecast, for dismissing the legends. The lack of natural sounds was still chilling. No hooting owls, no scuttling critters, no rustling leaves except for my own clumsy footsteps. It was as if the valley was holding its breath, waiting for me. Suddenly, a faint snap from behind me, not loud but distinct. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. I didn't dare turn around immediately. I listened, straining my ears. Silence, absolute. My mind raced. Was it a husk or just a branch disturbed by some natural force? But there were no natural forces at play here, not anymore. I risked a quick, terrified glance over my shoulder. Nothing, just the dark, silent expanse of the forest. The internal luminescence of the leaves seemed to pulse faintly. I forced myself to keep moving, my pace quickening further. Panic was setting in, cold and sharp. The idea of being followed, of being stalked by these shadowy entities, was almost worse than the direct confrontation. At least in the cabin, I knew where they were. Here, in the labyrinthine darkness of the forest, they could be anywhere, everywhere. The path, once a clear enough trail for a seasoned hiker, now felt alien and confusing. I found myself instinctively veering off, drawn by some subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the environment, a momentary weakening of the oppressive hum. I was navigating by instinct, by a gut feeling that screamed away from here, rather than by any recognizable landmarks. Minutes stretched into an eternity. My legs burned, my lungs ached. I stumbled, fell, picked myself up, and pushed on. The constant vigilance, the terror, was exhausting me. My flashlight remained off, a heavy, dead weight in my pocket, but I longed for its comforting beam, however dangerous it might be. Then I saw it, a glint of metal on the ground, caught by a stray sliver of starlight. I slowed, cautiously approaching. It was my wide-angle lens dislodged from my camera bag when I had dropped it in the cabin. I must have stepped on it, or it had fallen out during my frantic escape. A wave of despair washed over me. I was leaving a trail, not just in my clumsy footsteps, but in my discarded gear. They are drawn to the light, and my lens, with its reflective glass, could easily catch and redirect that faint internal light of the trees or even the starlight. I knelt, picking up the lens. It was cold, heavy, a piece of my former life, a reminder of the passion that had led me into this nightmare. I instinctively wiped it on my shirt, then, realizing the futility, slipped it into an outer pocket of my backpack. I couldn't leave anything behind that might serve as a beacon, however faint. As I straightened up, a new sensation pricked at my awareness. Not the tingling, not the hum, but something far more subtle. A displacement of air, almost imperceptible, like a silent breath taken nearby. And then that slithering, sibilant whisper right next to my ear again. SSSSSSS. I spun around, knife raised, a strangled cry escaping my lips. Nothing, still nothing, but this time I wasn't so sure. This time the whisper felt closer, more intentional. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I couldn't outrun them, not indefinitely, not in this state, and I couldn't fight them. I needed to hide, to disappear. I scanned the immediate area. The forest was dense, thick with ancient pines and undergrowth. There had to be a place to conceal myself, to regain my composure, to think. My gaze fell upon a cluster of unusually gnarled and twisted pines, their lower branches so densely intertwined that they formed a dark, almost cave-like alcove. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than standing exposed on the trail. I plunged into the undergrowth, pushing through thorny bushes and low-hanging branches, ignoring the scratches on my arms and face. I squeezed into the alcove, pulling myself as deep as I could, trying to make myself as small and invisible as possible. The thick pine needles and branches offered a surprising amount of cover, shrouding me in near-total darkness, cutting off most of the ambient starlight. I sank to the ground, my backpack cushioning my fall, and tried to regulate my breathing. Each ragged gasp felt impossibly loud. I closed my eyes, focusing on the sounds, or lack thereof, outside my makeshift hiding spot. The incessant hum of the charged air was still present, a low-frequency thrum that resonated in my bones. But the scraping, the tapping, the heavy thudding on the roof of the cabin, those sounds were gone, and terrifyingly, the whispers had stopped. Was it a trap? Were they just waiting for me to reveal myself? Minutes stretched into an eternity. I remained perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. My imagination conjured grotesque images of the husks, their shadowy forms flowing silently between the trees, their featureless faces turning towards my hiding spot, sensing my presence. Then a new sound, faint at first but growing steadily louder. A low, mournful sigh that seemed to emanate from the very air around me. It was like the collective exhalation of a million ancient, sorrowful souls. It wasn't aggressive, not predatory, but profoundly, utterly sad. It was a sound of immense loss, of something being endlessly drawn away. The sighing grew in intensity, encompassing the entire valley, vibrating through the ground, through my chest. It felt like the valley itself was weeping, mourning its own slow, inevitable demise. And with the sighing, the constant, upward drifting droplets seemed to multiply, a silent, iridescent rain rising from everything, from the leaves, from the bark, from the very earth itself. The air shimmered with them. This wasn't just water, this was the essence, the life force being harvested, drawn upwards. The ranger's words echoed, the very essence of the valley is being drawn upwards, harvested. The sighing reached a crescendo, a sound of profound emptiness that made my soul ache. I pressed my hands to my ears, trying to block it out, but it was inside me, a resonance in my very being. Then, just as the sound peaked, a sudden, blinding flash. Not the cold, alien blue of the husk, but a pure, intense white light, like a lightning strike, erupted from somewhere deep within the valley, far beyond my sight. The light illuminated the forest for a split second, revealing the ancient trees, their leaves shimmering with that unnatural internal glow, now brighter, almost crystalline. And for that brief, terrifying instant, I saw them. Silhouetted against the blinding white flash between the trees were dozens of the husks. They were everywhere, tall and impossibly thin, their shadowy forms absorbing the white light, making them seem like holes torn in reality. They were not moving. They were standing perfectly still, their spindly limbs extended upwards towards the source of the light, towards the sky. They were not hunting. They were participating, receiving. The white light vanished as quickly as it appeared, plunging the forest back into relative darkness, leaving stark afterimages burned into my retinas. The profound sighing began to recede, fading slowly, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier, more knowing than before. My heart was a frantic drum. They were everywhere. And they had been there the whole time, hidden in the peripheral vision, in the shadows darker than shadow. The cabin encounter hadn't been an isolated event. It had been a taste, a probing. The valley was a hive, and I was caught in its workings. I forced myself to breathe, to think. The white flash, the concentrated upward flow, the mournful sighing, it felt like a ritual, a harvesting event, and the husks weren't just predators, they were part of a larger mechanism, conduits for this draining process. I realized with a sickening lurch that my hiding place, while offering concealment, was also directly in their environment, surrounded by them. They knew I was there. They just weren't actively hunting me at this moment. Perhaps the harvest was their priority. I had to move now while they were occupied, while their attention was elsewhere. The thought of running through a forest teeming with these entities was terrifying, but the alternative was to stay and be discovered, to be harvested. I carefully, painstakingly extracted myself from the tangled branches. My muscles screamed in protest, stiff and sore from the cold and the fear. I kept my back to the densest part of the trees, trying to use the darkness as much as possible. The air felt different now. The immediate, suffocating malevolence I'd felt at the cabin was gone, replaced by a pervasive sense of emptiness, of something vital having been removed. The metallic sweet scent lingered, but it too was fading. I resumed my hurried walk, trying to keep a semblance of direction. The trailhead, just get to the trailhead. Even if my electronics were dead, even if the compass was useless, I had a general sense of direction. South. The sun, when it rose, would be my guide, if I survived until morning. As I pushed through the undergrowth, my foot caught on something yielding, something soft. I stumbled, nearly falling, and instinctively shone my dimming flashlight down for a split second, a foolish, desperate reflex. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the ground at my feet, and what I saw sent a fresh wave of icy terror through me. It was a skeleton, not just bones, but a partial skeleton, tangled in the roots of an ancient pine. The bleached bones of a human hand reached out, still encased in the tattered remains of a uniform sleeve. A park ranger's uniform, and next to it, glinting dully in the dim light, a small, tarnished silver locket, the same locket I had thrown at the husk. It had fallen here somehow. This was him, the ranger, his final resting place. He hadn't escaped, he had been harvested. His last entry unfinished, a desperate plea for someone to know, and now I was standing over his remains. A sudden, overwhelming wave of understanding washed over me, chilling me to the bone. The ranger's journal, his final warning. The locket, a desperate last measure against the husks. He had tried to fight. He had been consumed. And now I was in his exact footsteps, facing the same fate. I felt a profound sense of sorrow mixed with renewed terror. His sacrifice, his attempt to leave a warning, had been in vain. The valley had claimed him, and it was trying to claim me. I retrieved the locket, my fingers trembling as I picked it up. It was cold, inert, but the symbols on its surface seemed to glow faintly, almost imperceptibly in the darkness. This locket, this symbol, had repelled the husk, at least temporarily. It was a weapon not of force, but of disruption, of resistance. I clutched the locket tightly in my hand, feeling its cold weight, a tangible link to the ranger's tragic past. This wasn't just a journal entry anymore. This was a direct, horrifying inheritance. I couldn't stay there grieving over the bones of a stranger. I had to keep moving. I offered a silent, desperate apology to the ranger, a promise to try and make his warning count. I pushed on, the locket clenched in my fist, a new resolve hardening my terror. I wasn't just running anymore. I was fighting for more than my own survival. I was fighting to complete the ranger's last entry, to escape and warn the outside world. The forest seemed to thicken, the trees growing closer together, their branches forming a dense, oppressive canopy that blocked out even the faint starlight. The ground became uneven, riddled with roots and loose rocks. My pace slowed, despite my urgency. Then I noticed something else. The hum, which had receded somewhat after the white flash, was now slowly, subtly increasing again, and with it a faint reappearance of that metallic sweet scent. They were stirring. The harvest was over, and their attention was turning back to me. My heart hammered. I was still too close, too exposed. I stumbled through a particularly dense thicket and found myself at the edge of a small, forgotten clearing. In the center, bathed in the faint, ambient light of the sky that filtered through a break in the canopy, stood an anomaly. It was a single, ancient oak, its branches impossibly wide, its trunk massive and gnarled. But it was not normal. Its leaves, even in the darkness, glowed with an intense, crystalline luminescence, far brighter than the surrounding pines. And etched into its bark, deep and ancient, was a symbol, the same symbol as on the locket. The ranger's words screamed through my mind. I found the symbol. It's etched into the old oak near the spring. The same symbol I found on the locket in the chest, the one my grandfather always warned me about. He was a local, swore this valley had a thinness about it. He called it the veil, said sometimes it opened and things came through. This was the oak, the heart of the ritual, or a place of power. A chill, not of fear but of profound awe, ran through me. This was significant. As I stared at the oak, the symbols on the locket in my hand began to throb with a faint, sympathetic warmth. The air around the tree felt charged, humming with an intense, localized energy. And then I saw it. The upward drifting droplets here were not just silent. They coalesced around the oak, forming a shimmering, ethereal column of water rising directly from its trunk, dissolving into the sky. It was as if the tree itself was a fountain, but in reverse. And within that rising column, I saw faint, almost translucent strands of light like wisps of energy also being drawn upwards. The tree was being harvested directly, its life force pulled into the sky. Then, at the very base of the oak, nestled among its massive roots, I saw a small, dark opening. It looked like a natural hollow, perhaps the entrance to an animal's den, but something about it felt different. It was almost too perfectly concealed, too dark even for this lightless valley. My instincts, sharpened by hours of terror, screamed at me to stay away from the oak, from this obvious focal point of the valley's malevolence. But another, deeper intuition, fueled by the pulsing locket in my hand, urged me closer. This was the source. This was the veil. Perhaps it was also the key. I felt their presence again, closer now. The whispers returned, a soft, sibilant chorus from the surrounding trees echoing off each other, a sound of anticipation. The husks were closing in. They were drawn to the oak, to the light, to the harvest, and they were drawn to me. I made a decision, a desperate gamble. Instead of trying to outrun them, I would confront the source. The locket had repelled one. Maybe the symbol, the veil, held a secret, a way to fight back, or at least understand. I moved towards the oak, my steps deliberate, my knife still clutched. The whispers intensified, circling me, seeming to vibrate in my very bones. The air around the tree was thick with power, with that metallic sweet scent now almost overwhelming. The iridescent fluid, which I now knew to be the life essence, seeped from tiny cracks in the oak's bark, slowly, impossibly, rising with the column of water and light. As I neared the base of the tree, the symbols on the locket pulsed with a distinct, undeniable warmth. And then, as if in response, the hollow at the base of the oak seemed to deepen, to draw me in, becoming a vortex of shadow within the faint luminescence of the tree. I hesitated, my heart hammering. This was madness, but the husks were closing in. I could feel their collective gaze, a cold, empty pressure on my back. I could not escape them in the open forest. With a final, desperate surge of adrenaline, I plunged into the hollow, letting the darkness swallow me whole. The air inside was cold, dank, and heavy with the scent of damp earth and something ancient, something that had been undisturbed for centuries. I clicked on my flashlight, a momentary act of recklessness, but I couldn't navigate in total darkness now. The beam, weaker than before, cut through the gloom, revealing a narrow, winding tunnel, naturally formed within the oak's massive root system. The walls were rough-hewn earth and gnarled roots, woven together like a living tapestry. The whispers outside abruptly ceased. The humming of the charged air faded to a dull thrum. It was as if I had stepped through a barrier into a different space entirely. I moved cautiously, my light dancing ahead. The tunnel descended steeply, twisting and turning, my boots crunching on loose earth. It was surprisingly long, leading deeper and deeper into the earth beneath the roots of the ancient oak. My backpack scraped against the rough walls, kicking up dust. I felt a growing sense of unease, a feeling of being completely cut off, isolated even from the terror above ground. This was not a natural tunnel. It felt deliberate, carved by something other than water or time. After several minutes of descent, the tunnel opened into a cavern. It was not vast, but large enough to stand upright, its ceiling lost in the gloom beyond my flashlight's weak beam. The air here was utterly still, heavy and cold, and the metallic sweet scent was almost suffocating. My flashlight beam swept across the cavern, revealing its secrets. The walls were smooth, almost polished, and covered in intricate carvings. Not human carvings, not indigenous art, but geometric patterns, impossibly precise, swirling and interlacing in a dizzying display. And within these patterns, repeated endlessly, was the symbol, the one from the locket, from the oak. It glowed faintly, a subtle internal luminescence, responding to the light of my dying flashlight. In the center of the cavern, directly beneath a natural fissure in the ceiling, stood an altar, or what looked like one. It was a massive, naturally formed rock, smoothed and polished, also covered in the glowing symbols, and on its surface, a disturbing sight. It was a collection of objects, carefully arranged. Several more of the tarnished silver lockets, identical to the one I now held, lay open, their symbols glowing. Around them, arranged in a precise circle, were dozens of small, crystalline spheres. They shimmered with an inner light, and within each sphere I could see a faint, swirling mist, iridescent and ethereal. They looked like condensed versions of the upward drifting essence, like captured light. These were the harvested life force the ranger had written about. And then in the very center of the altar, something else. It was a single, larger crystal, pulsing with a slow, rhythmic beat like a heart. Its glow was an ethereal, silvery blue, and from its surface a constant stream of iridescent mist rose, slowly ascending towards the fissure in the ceiling, through which I could now see faint starlight. This was the source. This was the veil, or at least its point of focus. This was where the essence was being collected, refined, and sent, where upwards. My eyes followed the rising mist, then returned to the glowing crystal spheres. Each one was a life, an essence harvested from the valley, from the trees, from the water, from the very air, and chillingly from the ranger, and if I failed, from me. A sudden, sharp crack from the ceiling made me jump. Plaster dust mixed with fine earth rained down. The ground vibrated. The silence of the cavern was broken by a low, guttural moan, eerily similar to the one I had heard from the cabin. It was coming from above, from the oak. They had found the entrance. They were coming in. Panic flared, cold and sharp. I was trapped again, deeper than before. But this time I had seen the core of it, the mechanism. And the locket, still warm in my hand, seemed to pulse with a greater intensity now, almost vibrating with energy. I looked at the altar, at the crystal, at the harvested spheres. The ranger's journal, still in my backpack, had spoken of a thinness of the veil opening. This cavern, this altar, felt like the nexus of that opening. My flashlight beam flickered, dimming dangerously. Its battery was almost spent. I had to act, and fast. I glanced at the glowing symbols carved into the walls, into the altar. They were everywhere. They seemed to hum with a silent energy. The locket in my hand pulsed, resonating with them. A crazy idea born of desperation and the sheer impossibility of the situation began to form in my mind. The locket had repelled the husk. The symbols were clearly significant. What if they weren't just a warning, but a key, a way to disrupt the harvest, to close the veil? I approached the altar, my steps tentative. The closer I got to the central crystal, the stronger the pull, the more intense the metallic sweet scent. It felt like standing next to a black hole, an irresistible force drawing all life inwards. I placed my hand on the altar, on the glowing symbols. A jolt, not painful but profoundly unsettling, shot through my arm. The locket in my other hand flared with a brief, brilliant light, then dimmed, its warmth receding slightly. It was reacting to the altar, to the symbols. The low moan from above grew louder, closer. I heard distinct scraping and thudding sounds, followed by the terrifying, familiar sibilant whispers. They were in the tunnel. They were coming for me. My time was running out. I looked at the central crystal, pulsating with its silvery blue glow, the endless stream of iridescent mist rising from its surface. This was the heart of the operation. This was what they were drawing the essence into. If I could disrupt this, could I stop the harvest? Could I close the veil? The knife in my hand felt utterly useless against such an ethereal, energetic target, but I still had the locket, and I still had the Ranger's journal. Its last, unfinished words echoed in my mind. They are coming for. I pulled the journal from my backpack, holding it open to the final, frantic entry. Its pages were brittle, but the ink, though faded, seemed to hold a strange resonance in this charged environment. I looked at the symbol on the locket, then at the symbols carved into the altar. They were identical. What if the locket wasn't just a deterrent, but a focus, a key to manipulating the energy of the veil? I remembered the Ranger's grandfather's words. He called it the veil, said sometimes it opened and things came through. What if the symbols could also close it? With another loud thud from the tunnel entrance, the first shadowy tendril of a husk became visible, probing its way into the cavern. Its form was indistinct, but its presence was a cold, draining pressure. I had no choice. With a desperate cry, I slammed the journal shut, placing the locket on its cover, aligning its symbols with the faint, almost invisible impressions on the leather. Then I lifted the journal, holding it out like a shield, the locket facing the central crystal. A surge of energy, overwhelming and almost painful, shot through me. The locket on the journal cover flared with an intense, blinding white light. The symbols on the altar and the cavern walls exploded with a dazzling luminescence, echoing the locket's power. The central crystal, which had been pulsating with a slow, rhythmic beat, began to pulse faster, its silvery blue light intensifying to a blinding degree. The husks, now fully emerging from the tunnel, recoiled with another piercing shriek. Their shadowy forms flickered and wavered, some even dissolving partially like smoke in a strong wind. The draining sensation I had felt earlier reversed. Instead of having my essence pulled, I felt a sudden, invigorating rush of energy, as if the valley's life force was momentarily being returned, flowing back into me. The air in the cavern became a roaring tempest of light and energy. The upward drifting mist from the crystal reversed direction, swirling downwards, then dissipated into nothingness. The very ground beneath my feet vibrated violently. Cracks appeared in the smooth, carved walls, spreading rapidly, spiderwebbing across the ancient rock. The symbols on the walls and altar began to glow with an almost painful intensity. Then, one by one, they fractured, their inner light dying. The cavern itself seemed to buckle, the sound of grinding rock filling the air. I held the journal and locket aloft, channeling something I didn't understand, but which was clearly powerful. I felt a profound connection to the valley, to its pain, to its suffering. The energy coursing through me was both terrifying and exhilarating. The central crystal, the nexus of the harvest, began to crack. First a hairline fracture, then a spiderweb of fissures spreading rapidly across its surface. Its silvery blue light flickered wildly. Then, with a deafening crack that echoed like thunder in the subterranean space, it exploded. not outward with shards of rock and crystal, but inward, collapsing in on itself, drawing all light and energy into a singular, momentary point of absolute blackness. It was like a miniature sun imploding, sucking the very existence out of that spot in the cavern. A wave of pure, unfathomable void slammed into me. I felt my consciousness fraying, my very soul threatening to be pulled apart. The journal and locket were ripped from my grasp, torn away by an unseen force. I screamed, but no sound escaped my lips, swallowed by the sudden, absolute silence that followed the implosion. My flashlight, which had flickered so wildly, went dead. The cavern plunged into a terrifying, primordial darkness, a blackness so profound it felt like a living entity. I stumbled backwards, my hands instinctively flying to my head, trying to shield myself from the metaphysical shockwave. My knees buckled, and I fell hard onto the rough earth, scraping my hands. Disoriented, gasping, I struggled to make sense of what had just happened. The absolute silence persisted for what felt like an eternity, a terrifying void that pressed in on me from all sides. Then slowly, agonizingly, sounds began to return. First, a low, guttural groaning from the husks, a sound of profound pain and disorientation. Their predatory presence, which had been so palpable, was now fragmented, scattered, as if their collective mind had been momentarily shattered. I could feel the ground trembling violently beneath me, the cavern walls groaning and shifting. Fine dust and pebbles rained down, stinging my eyes. The smooth, carved walls, once glowing with intricate symbols, were now fractured and broken, some sections collapsing entirely. The air was thick with the scent of ozone, burnt earth, and a new, acrid smell I couldn't identify. I fumbled blindly in the darkness, my hand searching frantically for the journal and locket. They were my only connection to this impossible situation, my only possible means of defense. My fingers brushed against the familiar, cold metal of the locket, then the brittle pages of the journal. I clutched them to my chest, a desperate anchor in the chaos. The husks were still there. I could sense their ragged, weakened forms, their whispers now a cacophony of confused, agitated sibilants. But their malevolent focus was gone. They seemed disoriented, flailing, their shadowy forms flickering erratically, unable to maintain their cohesion. Some of them collapsed into puddles of shimmering, dark fluid like melted tar, slowly seeping into the earth. Others seemed to simply dissipate, thinning out until they were no more than wisps of smoke, carried away by an unseen draft. The cavern continued to rumble, the vibrations growing stronger. The fissure in the ceiling, through which the essence had ascended, was now a gaping maw, raining down loose earth and rock. This place was collapsing. The disruption of the central crystal, the heart of their harvest, was tearing the very fabric of the cavern apart. I had to get out, now. Pushing myself to my feet, I stumbled through the debris, guided only by instinct and the faint, almost imperceptible air current that marked the tunnel I had entered through. The darkness was absolute, suffocating. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. My flashlight was useless. I moved by touch, my hands scraping against rough rock, my boots sliding on loose earth. The thought of navigating that winding, descending tunnel in reverse in total darkness, with the cavern collapsing around me, was terrifying. But the alternative was to be buried alive. I reached the tunnel entrance, my fingers brushing against the familiar gnarled roots. The passage was steeper than I remembered, or perhaps my fear-addled mind was exaggerating. I scrambled upwards, pulling myself along by clutching at roots and rock formations, my backpack catching on every jagged protrusion. Each upward step was a struggle, my muscles screaming, my lungs burning. The groaning of the cavern intensified behind me, a deep, resonant sound that felt like the earth itself was crying out in pain. I heard loud, grinding sounds, then a final, thunderous crumph as a large section of the cavern likely gave way. The vibrations sent a fresh rain of dust and small rocks cascading down the tunnel. I flinched, covering my head, but kept pushing upwards, desperate to escape. As I neared the exit, a faint glimmer of starlight pierced the darkness ahead. Hope surged through me, a potent antidote to the terror. I redoubled my efforts, scrambling on hands and knees, clawing my way towards the light. Finally, I burst out of the hollow at the base of the ancient oak, gasping for breath, my body aching, covered in dust and grime. The night air, though still cool and charged, felt like a revelation after the suffocating darkness of the cavern. I looked around, my eyes blinking against the faint starlight. The clearing was different. The unnatural, crystalline luminescence of the oak's leaves had faded, replaced by a softer, more natural glow. The shimmering, ethereal column of water and light that had been rising from its trunk was gone. The air still hummed, but it was a more distant, less aggressive thrum. The pervasive metallic sweet scent had significantly diminished, replaced by the fresh, earthy smell of the forest. The husks were gone, not a single shadowy form was visible between the trees. The mournful sighing had ceased. The valley was silent once more, but this time it felt like a natural silence, a stillness of recovery rather than an oppressive, predatory quiet. I sank to my knees, leaning against the rough bark of the oak, my body trembling with exhaustion and residual fear. I was safe. For now, the central crystal was shattered, the harvest disrupted. The veil, it seemed, had been forced shut. I looked at the locket in my hand, then at the journal, its brittle pages still open to the ranger's last entry. The symbols on the locket no longer pulsed with any light, nor did they feel warm. They were just cold, tarnished silver. The energy was gone, spent, or perhaps merely dormant. My flashlight, as expected, was dead, but it didn't matter now. The starlight felt sufficient, almost friendly. I had to get out of the valley. My mission to escape and warn the outside world was more urgent than ever. I pushed myself up, my legs stiff and unsteady. The exhaustion was overwhelming, but adrenaline still provided a desperate surge of energy. I had survived. I had witnessed something impossible, something that defied all logic and science, and I had played a part in stopping it, at least for now. I needed to move quickly. The valley felt less immediately hostile, but I had no idea if the husks would regroup, if the veil would reopen, if the harvest would restart. I couldn't risk staying. I retrieved my backpack, grateful it was still mostly intact, though scratched and dirty. I checked its contents. My remaining food, the satellite messenger, probably still dead, but I'd check later, and, most importantly, the journal. The ranger's final warning, his desperate plea, I had honored it. Turning my back on the ancient oak, I plunged back into the forest, heading south towards where I hoped the trailhead lay. The walk would be long, through unfamiliar terrain in near darkness, but the paralyzing terror was gone, replaced by a grim determination. As I moved, I noticed a subtle yet profound change in the forest. The faint internal luminescence of the leaves had vanished. The trees, though still ancient and imposing, seemed to have returned to their normal, organic state. The upward drifting droplets were gone. The air felt cleaner, lighter, no longer charged with that oppressive hum. It was as if the valley had exhaled, released from a terrible burden. The silence, though still deep, was now punctuated by natural sounds. A faint rustle of leaves, a distant hoot of an owl, the gentle creak of branches in a breeze. Life was slowly returning, reclaiming its rightful place. I walked for what felt like hours, fueled by sheer willpower. My muscles ached, my eyes strained in the dim light, but I pushed on, placing one foot in front of the other. My path was still uncertain, but I moved with more confidence, no longer fearing unseen predators. The path I had come by, though vague, began to feel familiar. I recognized certain rock formations, a particularly bent pine, a stream crossing. As the first faint streaks of gray began to appear in the eastern sky, heralding the dawn, I found myself on a more defined trail. Relief, so potent it almost brought me to my knees, washed over me. I was on the right track. I was going to make it out. The sun finally peeked over the distant ridgeline, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Its warm light flooded the valley, chasing away the last vestiges of night's terror. The forest, bathed in golden light, seemed vibrant, alive. It was a stark contrast to the oppressive gloom of the past few days, a visual testament to the valley's recovery. I risked checking my satellite messenger. To my astonishment, the small screen flickered to life, showing a full battery, and after a tense few seconds, a faint signal bar. I almost cried out in triumph. The insulation was gone. The valley was no longer cut off. I immediately composed a short, urgent message. Urgent, something unnatural in valley, ranger dead, need extraction and investigation. Details to follow. Location, my approximate GPS coordinates now visible on the device. I sent it, watching the confirmation light flash. It was a simple message, but it was everything. It was the ranger's warning, finally delivered. With that done, I resumed my journey, a renewed sense of purpose driving me. The trailhead was still some distance away, but I knew I would make it. The path was clearer now, easier to follow in the daylight. As I walked, I began to process everything that had happened. The husks, the veil, the harvest. It was beyond anything I could have imagined, a horrifying intersection of folklore and a hidden, cosmic reality. My scientific mind still grappled with the implications, but my eyes had seen and my body had felt. There was no denying it. The ranger, his journal, his sacrifice. I had carried his story out, his warning, and in doing so I had stumbled upon a hidden mechanism, a way to fight back. The locket, the symbol, they were more than just talismans. They were part of a system, a countermeasure to the veil's opening. Hours later, tired, bruised, and emotionally drained, I finally saw it, the small, weathered sign marking the trailhead. My car, looking miraculously untouched, sat waiting in the small gravel lot. It was a sight of such profound normalcy that it brought tears to my eyes. I stumbled towards it, my legs leaden, my backpack feeling impossibly heavy. As I reached the car, I noticed something else. Two figures stood by a green park truck talking on radios. They were park rangers. Relief flooded me, so intense it made my knees buckle. I was safe. I was out. "Hey," I called out, my voice hoarse from disuse and exhaustion. My hand instinctively went to the ranger's journal, still clutched tightly in my backpack. The two rangers turned, their faces initially stern, then shifting to concern as they took in my disheveled, mud-splattered appearance. "Ma'am, are you all right?" one of them asked, moving towards me cautiously. "We got a strange message from your satellite device, said something about a ranger being dead and unnatural things." His voice held a note of disbelief, but his eyes were sharp. Yes, I gasped, leaning against my car, struggling to catch my breath. I'm fine, but the message, it's true, all of it. I pulled the journal from my pack, its brittle cover now even more worn. This belonged to Ranger David Miller. He didn't make it out. The Rangers exchanged a look. One of them, older, with kind but tired eyes, took the journal from me, his brow furrowing as he saw the name. David Miller, he was reported missing decades ago. Back in 47, they never found his body, just his camp, abandoned. He looked at me, a dawning horror in his eyes. You found his journal and you say he's dead. I found his remains, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, the memory of the skeleton under the pine tree vivid in my mind. And I found what killed him, what has been harvesting this valley. I paused, taking a deep breath. The veil, the husks, they're real, and I think I just closed it, but it won't last forever. The younger ranger scoffed, but the older one, his gaze fixed on the journal, held up a hand to silence him. Ma'am, what are you talking about? Husks? Veil? It's all in here, I said, gesturing to the journal. He called it a thinness about the valley, a place where something opens and things come through, things that feed on life force. I saw them. I was nearly one of their victims. I held up the locket. This saved me. It's part of a warning, a protection from his grandfather. The older ranger looked at the locket, then at me, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Legends, ma'am, local folklore. This valley has always had its stories, but... This isn't folklore anymore, I interrupted, my voice gaining strength. I was there, I saw it. The valley was dying, its essence being drawn out. I found their nexus, their altar, and I stopped it, for now. But you need to seal this place off. Seriously, don't let anyone in, not until you understand what happened. The Rangers were clearly skeptical, but my earnestness, combined with my exhausted, traumatized state and the sudden appearance of the long-lost journal, seemed to give them pause. We need to get you to a hospital, ma'am, the older ranger finally said, his voice firm but gentle. You're clearly in shock, and we'll take this journal and the locket. We'll open an investigation. No, I said, clutching the journal and locket tighter. I'm not letting go of these, not yet. I need to document this. I'm a photographer, a scientist. I need to process what happened, to write down everything. I have proof. My camera, my notes, my voice trailed off. My camera was likely damaged and my notes were barely coherent scribbles, but the journal was the key. Ma'am, this is an official investigation, the younger ranger insisted, stepping forward. And this is evidence, I retorted, holding up the journal. This is David Miller's dying testimony, and mine. I understand you're skeptical, but I need you to listen. This isn't just a missing persons case or a strange hiking accident. This is something profoundly dangerous, and if you don't take it seriously, more people will die. The veil will open again. The older ranger looked from the journal to my determined, albeit exhausted, face. He saw the genuine terror in my eyes, the conviction in my voice. He had likely heard the old tales growing up, tales that rational minds dismissed. But the journal of a ranger lost 76 years ago, found by a disoriented hiker with an incredible story, it was enough to at least warrant a closer look. Okay, he said slowly, let's get you in our truck. We'll take you to the nearest clinic. We'll bring your car back to the station. And then we're going to talk, and I mean really talk, everything from the beginning. He looked at the journal, and we're going to read this very carefully. I nodded, feeling a wave of relief so profound it threatened to buckle my knees again. They were listening. They might not believe, not yet, but they were listening. That was all I could ask for right now. As I walked towards the ranger's truck, my gaze fell upon the surrounding forest. It was beautiful, serene, bathed in the morning sun. But I knew its hidden truth, its capacity for unimaginable horror. The veil was closed for now, but it was still there. And the husks, those shadows darker than shadow, were still out there, beyond the boundary of this valley, waiting for their next chance. I had bought the world some time, but time, I knew, was a fleeting thing. The drive to the nearest small town felt surreal, a slow re-entry into a world that no longer made complete sense. The rangers, John and Mike, were mostly quiet, occasionally asking me basic questions about my identity and physical condition. I answered automatically, my mind still reeling, replaying the terrifying events in the cabin, the cavern, the forest. At the small local clinic, I was examined by a bewildered doctor who found me physically exhausted, dehydrated, and covered in scratches and bruises, but otherwise sound. My pulse was a little high, my blood pressure elevated, but that was to be expected. I gave him a sanitized version of my story, omitting the husks and veil details, claiming I had been lost, fallen, and hallucinated due to exhaustion. He prescribed rest and a course of antibiotics for some minor infections in my scrapes. While I was being treated, Ranger John took my backpack and the journal, promising to keep them safe. I refused to part with the locket, clutching it in my hand even as the nurses tried to examine me. They gave up, attributing it to trauma. Later that afternoon, after a hot shower and some food, which tasted like ash after the fear-fueled deprivation, I sat down with Rangers John and Mike in a small, sterile office at the park station. My car was parked outside, my gear still inside untouched. They had already made calls, initiating a formal investigation into the discovery of human remains and possible unexplained phenomena. The regional supervisor was on their way. "All right, ma'am," Ranger John began, the journal resting on the table between us. "We've had a chance to skim through this, and well, it's a lot to take in." He looked tired, his skepticism clearly warring with the stark, disturbing reality of Miller's entries. "He describes a veil, a thinness in the valley," Mike added, flipping through the journal. "And these husks, beings that feed on life force. It sounds like something out of a horror novel." "It felt like one," I said, my voice steady now despite the tremor in my hands. "But it was real, every word of it. I experienced it all exactly as Ranger Miller described. The silence, the compass spinning, the electronics failing, the upward drifting droplets of fluid, that iridescent sap. I even heard the moan from the cabin." I recounted my experiences in detail, starting from the moment I found the journal, through my desperate escape, the encounter with the husk at the cabin door, the shattering of the central crystal, and the discovery of Ranger Miller's remains. I described the husks, their shadowy forms, their cold, draining presence. I described the altar, the crystalline spheres, the central crystal that imploded. I showed them the locket, explaining its apparent power. John and Mike listened in stunned silence, their initial skepticism slowly eroding under the weight of my narrative. They interrupted occasionally, asking clarifying questions, their voices tinged with growing unease. "So you're saying this veil allowed these entities to enter our world," John said slowly, piecing it together. "And they were essentially draining the life out of the valley itself." "Yes," I confirmed, "and Ranger Miller, he became one of their victims. His journal was a desperate attempt to warn whoever came next, and I believe the locket with its symbol is a key, a way to disrupt their access to close the veil, however temporarily." Mike, who had been openly scoffing earlier, was now pale, his eyes wide. We've had strange reports from that valley over the years. Hikers getting lost, strange feelings, occasional disappearances that were always attributed to bears or rock slides. And the valley itself, it's always felt a bit off. Locals call it the sleeping heart or the empty place. Miller's grandfather called it the Veil, I said. He knew, he tried to warn them. And you say you destroyed their nexus, John asked. The crystal in the cavern. It imploded, I clarified. It ripped the cavern apart. I barely got out. The husks, they seemed to dissipate or at least retreat. The valley felt different afterwards, like it was breathing again. John ran a hand over his face. This is unprecedented. We can't just go to the supervisor with a story about shadow creatures and interdimensional veils. You have the journal, I argued. You have my testimony, and I'm sure there are still signs in the valley. The charring on the cabin wall, the iridescent fluid, the changed trees, though they might be recovering now. And Miller's remains, that's tangible proof. His remains confirm he died there, John conceded. But the rest, it's a lot. We need to go in. A full team, cautiously. Maybe a forensic team for Miller's site. But how do we even explain what we're looking for? You tell them you're investigating an ancient, unknown ecological phenomenon, I suggested. Something that drains the life out of the environment, and you take precautions. You bring sensitive equipment, and you bring the locket, and you read the journal, and you believe it. A new presence entered the room. A stern-faced woman in a Crisper Park Ranger uniform, her gaze sharp and assessing. She was clearly the regional supervisor, and she looked annoyed. Ranger John, Ranger Mike, she said, her voice crisp. What exactly is going on here? My office received a very unusual message from this individual's satellite device. And then a cryptic report about discovering remains and unexplained phenomena. I expect a full, coherent briefing. John hesitated, glancing at me. I gave him a small, encouraging nod. This was it, the start of something much bigger than just a personal escape. Supervisor Evans, John began, picking up the journal. This is Dr. Eris Thorne. She entered the Miller Valley 3 days ago for a photography expedition, and she's just returned with Ranger David Miller's journal detailing his disappearance from 76 years ago, and a story. He pushed the journal across the table towards her. A story that, after listening to Dr. Thorne, I believe we need to take very seriously indeed. Supervisor Evans raised an eyebrow, a skeptical look on her face. She picked up the brittle, leather-bound journal, her fingers brushing over the faded gold lettering on the cover. Ranger Miller, from 1947, this is quite a relic, but what exactly is the story, Ranger John? I met her gaze, my own determination firm. The story, Supervisor Evans, is about a hidden truth. About a valley that's not just remote, but also a gateway, and about a threat that could extend far beyond this forest if we don't understand and contain it. Her eyes narrowed, sensing the shift in the room's atmosphere, the palpable tension that had replaced the initial skepticism. This was not a simple tale of a lost hiker. This was something else entirely. I'm listening, she said, her voice now devoid of its initial annoyance, replaced by a quiet, professional caution. She opened the journal, her gaze falling on the first dated entry. I knew this was only the beginning. The immediate danger might have passed, but the true fight, the battle to convince, to protect, to prevent, was just starting. I had emerged from the valley, but the valley had not left me. It had changed me, branded me with a terrifying knowledge, and given me a mission that would define the rest of my life. The next few days were a blur of debriefings, examinations, and intense discussions. Supervisor Evans, after reading Miller's journal and hearing my full account, had shed her skepticism completely. The discovery of Miller's physical remains, confirmed by preliminary forensic analysis to be consistent with a 1947 disappearance, provided a grim anchor of reality to an otherwise unbelievable narrative. The tattered ranger uniform fragments and the specific location of the remains, exactly as I described, were undeniable. She organized an expedition, not a typical search and rescue, but a heavily equipped, cautiously approached reconnaissance mission into Miller Valley. John and Mike were part of the team, along with specialized personnel from various government agencies, including a discrete scientific unit that dealt with unconventional phenomena. I insisted on accompanying them, not just as a guide, but as a witness, and I hoped a resource. My knowledge of Miller's journal and my direct experiences made me invaluable. The team was a mixture of hardened park rangers, seasoned paramilitary types with a glint in their eyes that suggested they'd seen things beyond normal comprehension, and quiet, intense scientists carrying bizarre-looking detection equipment. We moved in silence, a palpable tension in the air. The mission was officially categorized as an ecological survey and forensic investigation, but the unspoken truth among the inner circle was far stranger. As we re-entered Miller Valley, I noticed the subtle yet profound changes. The air was indeed clearer, the oppressive hum gone. The trees no longer held that eerie internal luminescence. The upward drifting droplets were nowhere to be seen. It was as if the valley had been purged, cleansed, but the memory of what had transpired here lingered, a chilling echo in the otherwise serene landscape. We reached the abandoned cabin, my former refuge and prison. It was a ruin, even more so than before. The front door was completely gone, splintered wood scattered across the threshold, exactly as I had left it. Inside, the cabin was a mess. The overturned table, the shattered lamp, and the charred patch on the wall, still faintly iridescent, a stark reminder of the husk's touch. The shimmering fluid on the floor, however, had completely vanished, leaving only a dark, damp stain. The forensic team meticulously documented everything, taking samples of the charred wood, the residual dampness on the floor, and the dust. Their instruments, however, were silent, unable to detect any lingering, unnatural energies. "It's like whatever was here just packed up and left," one of the scientists murmured, looking puzzled as his readings came back flat. "War was forced to retreat," I corrected, holding up the locket. "I believe the symbol, the veil, acts as a temporary barrier. It's not gone, it's just dormant now." We then proceeded to the ancient oak. I led them to the gnarled roots where I had discovered Ranger Miller's remains. The bones were still there, stark against the earth, now carefully bagged and tagged by the forensic team. The locket I had previously taken from his remains was now with me, a companion to the one from the chest. The hollow at the base of the oak, the entrance to the cavern, was still there, but it looked like a natural cavity now, dark and uninviting. There was no longer any faint luminescence emanating from within, no sense of profound energy. "This is where I went in," I explained to Supervisor Evans and the team leader from the scientific unit, a woman named Dr. Lena Hansen, whose sharp, intelligent eyes missed nothing. "This is where the veil was concentrated. The central crystal, the altar, it was all down there." "And you say it imploded?" Dr. Hansen asked, her voice calm and analytical. Yes, a complete collapse inward. It tore the cavern apart, I confirmed. A team of structural engineers equipped with specialized rock-penetrating radar attempted to map the subterranean space. Their screens, however, showed only a chaotic, jumbled mass beneath the oak, an unstable network of collapsed earth and shattered rock. The cavern was indeed gone, buried, and destroyed. Whatever nexus had been there was now inaccessible, possibly vaporized. There's nothing left, the lead engineer reported, shaking his head. It's too unstable to even consider digging. Any attempt would likely collapse the entire area. A sense of eerie finality settled over the team. The immediate threat was neutralized, the evidence largely obscured or destroyed. It was as if the valley was actively trying to erase the memory of what had happened, returning to its tranquil, deceptive facade. But for me and for those who had read Miller's journal and heard my story, the truth was indelible. We had faced the impossible, and we had won, albeit by a terrifyingly narrow margin. The investigation continued for several weeks. Miller Valley was officially designated a restricted area, citing unstable geological formations and unique ecological sensitivities. A small, discreet research outpost was established at the trailhead, ostensibly to monitor wildlife, but actually to watch for any recurrence of the phenomena. I became an unofficial consultant to Dr. Hansen's team, sharing my first-hand accounts, my interpretations of Miller's journal, and my theories about the veil and the husks. The two lockets, now cleaned and meticulously examined, became a focal point of their research. They were unable to determine their composition or origin, but specialized scans revealed incredibly complex, interwoven energy patterns within the silver, dormant but clearly capable of activation. These symbols, Dr. Hansen mused one day, her fingers tracing the engravings on a locket, they seem to act as a kind of resonant frequency modulator. What you did, Dr. Thorne, by combining the locket with Miller's journal, you might have created a focused energetic pulse that disrupted their, whatever they are, like a feedback loop amplified by the veil's own energy. So it was like a weapon, I said, still trying to reconcile science with the supernatural. Perhaps, or a key, she corrected, to turn something off or potentially to turn something on. Her words sent a shiver down my spine. The thought that I might have simply switched off an alien mechanism rather than destroyed it was unsettling, and the idea of turning something on was terrifying. My personal life predictably was upended. My expedition data, which had initially been my reason for entering the valley, felt utterly trivial now. My photography career, once my passion, seemed distant and irrelevant. How could I go back to photographing landscapes after seeing shadows that were darker than shadow, after witnessing the very essence of life being harvested? I found myself increasingly drawn to the research, to the mystery of the veil. My pragmatic, scientific mind, once so resistant to the supernatural, was now wholly consumed by it. I had seen the evidence, felt the impossible. My reality had expanded in terrifying ways. The local media, catching wind of the restricted area and the unexplained phenomena, began to speculate wildly. Tales of cryptids, UFOs, and ancient curses filled the tabloids. We did our best to control the narrative, but the truth, or a distorted version of it, was leaking out. It was only a matter of time before someone, driven by curiosity or foolishness, tried to circumvent the restrictions. Weeks turned into months. Life at the outpost became a strange blend of routine and constant vigilance. We monitored the valley with every piece of advanced technology available, searching for any flicker of the husks, any sign of the veil reopening. Nothing. The valley remained outwardly peaceful, beautiful, and utterly silent about its secret. I found solace in the quiet solitude of the outpost, poring over Miller's journal, cross-referencing his observations with folklore, with obscure scientific theories. I was trying to build a framework, a lexicon, to understand the incomprehensible. The Rangers' unfinished entry, "They are coming for," still haunted me. Coming for what, or for whom? One crisp autumn evening, as the first snow flurries began to dust the peaks around the valley, I stood at the edge of the restricted zone, looking out at the silent forest. Dr. Hansen joined me, a mug of steaming tea in her hands. "Still nothing," she said, her breath misting in the cold air. "No energy signatures, no anomalous readings. It's like the entire event was a localized, isolated hiccup." "It wasn't a hiccup," I replied, my gaze fixed on the darkening woods. "It was an invasion, a harvest, and it will happen again. I can feel it." She nodded slowly. "We've been studying the local geology. There's a unique confluence of underground fault lines and mineral deposits in that valley. It creates a peculiar electromagnetic field. What if this veil isn't just some mystical gateway, but a natural phenomenon amplified by a specific alignment of these geological factors? A kind of naturally occurring temporal or dimensional anomaly." "And the husks," I asked, "are they just part of the local ecosystem of this anomaly, creatures that thrive when the veil is thin?" "Or they are the ones who manipulate it," she countered thoughtfully, "using these natural phenomena for their own purposes, like fishermen using a net." She paused, then added, "The local legends, the ones Miller's grandfather spoke of, they describe cycles, periods of thinness, periods of openness. What if this isn't the first time the veil has opened, or the last?" Her words echoed my deepest fear. The relief I had felt at closing the veil was temporary. This was a recurring event. A recurring event, a natural function of this place, which the husks have simply learned to exploit. I looked at her, then back at the silent, snow-dusted woods. Then we need to understand the cycle, when it opens, why it opens, and how to stop it permanently. Not just for this valley, but for everywhere. If this veil can open here, why not elsewhere? Dr. Hansen exhaled, a plume of white in the cold air. "That's the nightmare scenario, isn't it? A global phenomenon, but we have no evidence of that yet. For now, our focus is here, on Miller Valley." She gripped her mug tighter. "And we're running out of leads. Our instruments are silent. The lockets are inert. Miller's journal, while invaluable, is still a personal account, a series of observations. It doesn't offer a scientific blueprint." "Then we need to look beyond the instruments," I said, a sudden spark of inspiration in my exhaustion. "Beyond the current scientific understanding. Miller's grandfather called it folklore, but it was real. What else did he know? What else did the locals say? We need to talk to the oldest people in the surrounding towns, the ones who remember the legends, the ones who perhaps passed them down to Miller's grandfather." Dr. Hansen considered this. "A good idea, Eris. We've focused so much on the technical, the empirical, but sometimes ancient knowledge holds keys our modern minds have forgotten." She took a sip of tea. "I'll start making inquiries, see if there's anyone left who remembers the old stories, the real stories, not just the sanitized versions." And so our investigation pivoted. While the sensors continued their silent vigil over the valley, Dr. Hansen and I began to delve into the local history, into the dusty archives of forgotten families and community libraries. It was a slow, painstaking process. Most people we spoke to dismissed the old tales as quaint superstitions. exaggerated warnings meant to keep children away from dangerous parts of the forest. But then we found Sarah Jenkins. She was in her late 80s, living in a small, isolated cabin nestled deep in a neighboring hollow, a place so remote it seemed untouched by time. Her eyes, though clouded with age, held a startling sharpness, a wisdom that seemed to predate her years. She was the gray tant of a long-retired park ranger who had once served with Miller's father. She remembered the Miller family well. We introduced ourselves cautiously, explaining our interest in local folklore in the old stories of Miller Valley. Sarah invited us in, offering us strong, sweet tea brewed over a crackling wood stove. The cabin was filled with the scent of wood smoke, dried herbs, and something else, an ancient, quiet presence. "Ah, the Miller Valley," Sarah mused, stirring her tea. "The old ones called it the Whispering Maw, said it had a hunger, always took its due one way or another." My heart quickened. "The hunger," I prompted. "Aye, not for flesh, not like a bear, for living, for the spark of life itself. My grandmother, she used to tell stories, said there were times the trees would weep silver tears and the birds would fall silent. And if you listened real close, you'd hear the whispers like wind through dead leaves calling your name." "The husks," I murmured, exchanging a glance with Dr. Hansen. Sarah nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on something beyond the cabin walls. "Shadow folk," grandmother called 'em, never seen straight on but felt, like a cold dread in your bones. They came when the veil was thin, when the world here and the world there got too close. "And the veil?" Dr. Hansen asked, ever the scientist seeking precision. "What exactly did your grandmother say it was?" "Not a thing you can see with your eyes, not really," Sarah explained. "More like a seam in the cloth of the world. Sometimes it frays, sometimes it tears. And when it does, the hunger comes through. To mend the tear, they need essence, life, to feed the seam, make it strong again." This was a new, horrifying interpretation. Not an invasion for conquest, but a harvest for sustenance to maintain a dimensional barrier. "To mend the tear," I repeated. "So the husks aren't just taking life, they're using it." "Using it to keep the two worlds apart," Sarah confirmed, her voice low. "Or so the stories went. Miller's grandfather, he knew this. He inherited the knowledge passed down through his line. They were the wardens, you see, the keepers of the knowledge." "The wardens?" I asked, the Ranger Miller a warden, his grandfather too. "Aye, each generation one was chosen to watch, to warn, and to protect. That's what those lockets are for, child." She gestured towards the locket I still wore around my neck, hidden beneath my shirt. "Not just pretty trinkets, they hold the essence of the wardens themselves, their will, their knowledge imprinted on the silver, a key not just to close but to direct." Dr. Hansen leaned forward, her scientific mind buzzing. "Direct? What do you mean, direct?" "When the veil opens and the hunger comes, the wardens, they can guide it," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Not stop it, not really. That's like trying to stop the tide, but guide it away from the innocent. Guide it towards other things, things that have no spark, or things that choose to offer their own, to keep the balance." My blood ran cold. "Are you saying the wardens knowingly directed the husks to other life forms as a sacrifice?" Sarah met my gaze, her eyes unwavering. "To save the many, sometimes you must sacrifice the few. It's the old way, the hard way. Better a lost deer than a lost child. Better a dying tree than a dying family." "But Ranger Miller, he was harvested." I said, remembering the skeleton, the unfinished journal entry. He didn't guide it away, he became a victim. Times change, Sarah sighed. The old ways are forgot. The knowledge grows thin. Miller's grandfather, he tried to teach him, but the boy was modern, a ranger, believed in science, dismissed it as superstition. By the time he found the journal, found the locket, it was too late for him to truly understand. He knew how to close it, perhaps, but not why it opened or the full burden of what it meant to be a warden. The veil's opening, Dr. Hansen said, the geological anomaly. Could it be a natural energy surge that the husks exploit, and the lockets, they interact with that energy? The symbols, I added, remembering how they pulsed. The ranger Miller's grandfather said they were from the old ones etched into the oak. What if the symbols are the key, not just the locket itself, but the language of the symbols? Sarah nodded again, a faint smile touching her lips. You're getting warmer, child. The symbols are the language of the veil. The wardens understood it, spoke to it in a way to calm the hunger, to guide the seam. She then dropped a bombshell. My grandmother, she had a book, old leather-bound, full of the symbols, explanations, a guide to the warden's duties, but it was lost. Stolen, some said, during the war, or perhaps just misplaced. A book of symbols, of knowledge. This was far more concrete than vague folklore. This could be the scientific blueprint Dr. Hansen needed, the instruction manual I sought. We need to find that book, I declared, my mind racing. It could contain the complete understanding of the veil, of the symbols, of how to properly manage the cycle. Sarah looked at us, her expression wistful. Good luck with that, children. That book is old, might be dust by now, or in some collector's vault, its true purpose unknown. We left Sarah's cabin that day with more questions than answers, but with a renewed sense of purpose. The warden lineage, the true nature of the veil as a seam that needed mending, the idea of directed sacrifice, and the missing book of symbols, it was a wealth of new information. Back at the outpost, Dr. Hansen and I pooled our findings. The wardens were essentially managing a dangerous energy conduit, Dr. Hansen theorized, sketching furiously on a whiteboard. Using these lockets, which act as energy manipulators and the language of the symbols to direct the flow. The husks then are like immune cells drawn to the tear, facilitating the mending process by absorbing life essence. They aren't inherently malicious, just fulfilling a biological or energetic role. But they still take life, I countered. And if not directed, they'll take indiscriminately, like Miller. Precisely, and if the seam is left untended, unmended, what happens then? Dr. Hansen paused, a grim look on her face. Does the tear grow? Does it lead to an even larger bleed-through, a full-scale rupture? That was the terrifying implication. What I had done by collapsing the central crystal, I hadn't necessarily closed the veil, but rather disrupted its mending process, perhaps creating a temporary, unstable fix. The hunger would still be there, the seam would still need mending, and without a warden to guide it, it would find its own way. The search for the lost warden's book began. We scoured historical societies, contacted antiquarian book dealers, and even reached out to a few carefully vetted researchers in fringe academia who specialized in esoteric texts. Weeks stretched into months, then into almost a year. The Miller Valley remained quiet, peaceful, deceptively benign. The outpost continued its silent watch. During this time, I delved deeper into the Warden's history, trying to understand their mindset. The concept of chosen sacrifice, of guiding a predatory force to maintain a greater balance, was a heavy philosophical burden. It weighed on me. Could I, if faced with the choice, direct the husks to innocent life to save more lives, to save the world? The question gnawed at my conscience. The lockets remained inert, worn symbols on cold silver. I tried everything Dr. Hansen and I could think of to activate them, to understand their energy signature more deeply. We ran them through every known spectral analysis, energetic field test, and material composition scan. Nothing. They remained a mystery, their function only understood through the fragmented legends. Then one rainy afternoon, a breakthrough. A dusty email from an obscure historical society in rural Oregon. They had acquired a collection of items from a reclusive estate sale. Among them, a peculiar leather-bound book written in an unknown script with strange geometric symbols on every page. It matched Sarah Jenkins' description perfectly. I was on the first plane out. Dr. Hansen followed shortly after. The book was everything we had hoped for and more. It was indeed a compendium of symbols, an intricate dance of lines and shapes, each accompanied by cryptic annotations in an archaic form of English. It was a manual, a guide to understanding and manipulating the veil. It was the Warden's Handbook. The book detailed the cyclical nature of the veil's thinness, explaining that it was linked to specific astronomical alignments and telluric energy surges, deep Earth currents. These alignments, occurring roughly every 70–80 years, caused a stress fracture in reality, a weakening of the barrier between dimensions. The hunger, the husks, were a natural response to this fracture, a biological mechanism designed to restabilize the veil by absorbing and feeding it with life essence. The symbols, the book explained, were a form of energetic language. They didn't just repel the husks, as I had initially thought, but could channel and direct the veil's energies, influencing the husk's behavior and the very flow of life essence. The lockets, it turned out, were not just talismans, but focalizers, devices designed to amplify and broadcast the Warden's intent through the symbols. And the most chilling revelation, that they are coming for, in Miller's journal. It wasn't just a generic threat. The book made it clear that while undirected husks would take any life when the veil was severely compromised, or when a warden failed in their duties, the husks would actively seek out the warden's bloodline, drawn to their unique energetic signature, to eliminate the source of their disruption or to absorb the concentrated knowledge stored within them. Miller's grandfather had warned him to hide, to sever his connection. But Miller, in his desperate attempt to fight, had unknowingly called them to him. My actions in the cavern, by using the locket and journal, had indeed created a powerful energetic pulse, but it hadn't closed the veil in the traditional sense. It had overloaded the current mending cycle, causing a chaotic disruption, a sort of energetic indigestion for the husks, forcing them into temporary retreat and dormancy. It was a brute force solution, not an elegant one. And it had bought us time, but it hadn't solved the underlying problem. The book, however, held the true solution. It described a series of intricate rituals, specific symbolic sequences, and precise energetic manipulations that, when performed correctly with a warden's locket, could guide the natural mending process. It spoke of directing the hunger towards non-sentient life forms, towards excess biological energy, even towards inert geological stress points, to stabilize the veil without unnecessary loss of human life. It was a complex, almost shamanic science. And then a new, terrible realization dawned on us. The book described the next thinning or veil cycle as being imminent. The last one had been around 1947 when Miller was lost. The book predicted the next major astrological and telluric alignment, the one that would cause the next severe stress fracture, was just a few weeks away. We have to go back, I said, looking at Dr. Hansen. We have to prepare. We have to become the wardens. Dr. Hansen, usually so composed, looked pale. Eris, this is beyond anything we've ever conceived. We're talking about performing ancient rituals, manipulating unseen energies, facing these husks by design. It's not just observation anymore, it's active engagement, and it's incredibly dangerous. It's the only way, I insisted. We have the book, we have the lockets, we have the knowledge Ranger Miller died trying to pass on. We have to finish what he started. We have to learn to be wardens. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and growing resolve. You're not a Miller, Eris. You don't have the warden bloodline. I don't need to be a Miller to understand the symbols, I retorted, clutching the locket, or to feel the urgency. Ranger Miller didn't have the complete knowledge either, and he still managed to disrupt them. I have the book. I have his locket and the one I found with his remains, and I know what it feels like to be hunted by them. That's enough. Reluctantly, but with a shared sense of profound responsibility, Dr. Hansen agreed. We began a crash course in warden studies, poring over the archaic texts, practicing the symbolic sequences, trying to understand the energetic principles described in the book. It was like learning a new language, a new science, a new spirituality all at once. We spent days and nights poring over the journal, the book, and the lockets. The book contained detailed diagrams, almost like musical scores, of how to perform the rituals, which symbols to activate in what order, and how to focus one's intent through the locket. It was clear that the warden's bloodline wasn't just about genetics. It was about an inherent energetic resonance, a sensitivity to the veil that could be honed and trained. I found myself increasingly sensitive to subtle energy shifts, to the faint hum of the earth that I had never perceived before. The lockets, which had been inert, now seemed to pulse faintly in my hand as I practiced the symbolic sequences, responding to my focused intent, to the echoes of the ancient knowledge now being reawakened. Doctor Hansen, with her scientific background, began to design new, highly specialized instruments to try and detect and quantify these subtle energy manipulations, to provide some empirical data to our increasingly esoteric practice. As the predicted date of the next thinning approached, the atmosphere at the outpost grew tense. Supervisor Evans kept in the loop about our research, though we had to significantly sanitize the more mystical aspects for her, had approved our plan for a highly specialized ecological intervention in the valley. A team of highly trained, discreet personnel, along with John and Mike, was assembled. They were told to follow our instructions implicitly, even if they seemed nonsensical. Their role was to provide security and backup, to observe and document, and to trust that we knew what we were doing. The final days were a flurry of preparations. We packed specialized gear, advanced energetic field detectors, long-range thermal cameras, communication equipment, and a backup emergency extraction plan. And of course the warden's book, now carefully laminated and protected, and the two lockets, which I now wore openly around my neck, their cold weight a constant reminder of my new, terrifying responsibility. The astronomical alignment was predicted for a moonless night just after the winter solstice. The telluric energy surges would be at their peak then. It was the perfect storm, the ideal conditions for the veil to open, for the hunger to return. We entered the valley under a canopy of frigid, starless sky. The air was heavy, still, almost expectant. Even before our instruments confirmed it, I could feel it, a subtle shift in the valley's energy, a nascent vibration, a prickling sensation on my skin. The silence was back, not the natural quiet of the woods, but the preternatural stillness that precedes a storm. As we moved deeper toward the ancient oak, our instruments began to flicker just as Miller's had. Compasses spun erratically. Satellite communications crackled with static, then went silent. The valley was once again cut off, insulated from the outside world. This time we were prepared. "Readings are spiking," Dr. Hansen reported, her voice hushed, her gaze fixed on a small handheld device that was now flashing red. "Electromagnetic fields off the charts, gravimetric anomalies, unusual localized fluctuations. It's starting." We reached the clearing of the ancient oak. It stood massive and imposing, its gnarled branches reaching like skeletal arms into the oppressive darkness. This time there was no crystalline luminescence from its leaves, no upward drifting column of light. Instead, the air around it shimmered with a subtle, almost invisible distortion, like heat haze on a summer road, even in the freezing air. The metallic sweet scent, so sickeningly familiar, began to seep into the air, faint at first, then growing stronger. "It's different this time," I murmured, "less aggressive, more passive, like a membrane stretching, not tearing." "The implosion you caused disrupted the previous cycle," Dr. Hansen theorized. "It might have temporarily stabilized the veil, preventing a full, chaotic rupture, but the natural thinning is still occurring." John and Mike, along with the rest of the security team, fanned out, their weapons ready, their faces grim. They might not fully understand, but they trusted us. I opened the warden's book, its pages illuminated by the faint red glow of a headlamp. I found the sequence for guiding the veil's mending. The first symbol was complex, a swirling vortex with precise nodal points. I took a deep breath, clutching the locket in my hand. "All right," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "The first sequence. Focus on the oak. Visualize the energy flowing from the surrounding life through the tree into the veil. We need to channel it, not fight it." I closed my eyes, focusing my intent, recalling the sensation of energy pulsing through me in the cavern. I traced the symbol on the locket with my thumb, then projected its image onto the shimmering distortion around the oak. I spoke the archaic words from the book, my voice a low murmur in the silent clearing. As I did, a faint, ethereal glow emanated from the locket, casting a pale, silver light onto the oak's bark. The shimmering distortion around the tree intensified, then began to coalesce, slowly forming a faint, transparent column of energy rising from the oak into the sky. It wasn't the chaotic, iridescent column of harvested essence I had seen before. This was different, controlled, almost gentle. Our instruments, Dr. Hansen confirmed, were now picking up stable, directed energy flows. "It's working, Aris," she whispered, her voice a mix of awe and relief. "The readings are coherent, sustained, you're influencing it." But then a new sound, a low, sibilant whisper, not from the trees, but from within the shimmering column itself. It was the husks. They were here, drawn by the opening veil, by the scent of life. And this time they weren't just shadows. I could almost make out faint, indistinct shapes within the column, like dark fish swimming in an ethereal current. "They're coming through," Mike murmured, his rifle aimed at the column, though he knew it was useless. "They're not coming through," I corrected, recalling the book's teachings. "They're part of the process. They're the menders. We need to direct them." I flipped to the next page in the book. This ritual was more complex, involving a shift in intention, a focus on specific sources of energy. The book described channeling the husks towards areas of excess or non-sentient life. In this case, the book explicitly mentioned the deep root systems of ancient trees, geological stress points, and even dormant mineral deposits, the very essence of the valley itself, not its animal life. I repeated the new symbolic sequence, tracing it on the locket, focusing my intent. I visualized the shadowy forms within the column, guiding them like a shepherd guiding a flock towards the deep earth beneath the oak, towards the geological anomalies Dr. Hansen had identified. The husks in the column seemed to hesitate, their whispers momentarily confused. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, they shifted. Their forms elongated, thinned, and began to sink downwards, dissolving into the base of the oak, into the very earth itself. The metallic sweet scent intensified for a moment, then began to recede, replaced by a subtle, grounding aroma of ozone and rich, damp soil. The energy flow is stabilizing, grounding, Dr. Hansen exclaimed, her eyes wide. It's being absorbed into the earth, it's mending the veil from below. We continued the ritual, moving through several more complex sequences as the night deepened, guiding the flow of essence, directing the husks. It was an exhausting, mentally taxing process. I felt a profound connection to the valley, to its ancient pulse, to the very fabric of reality stretching and mending around us. The lockets warmed in my hand, glowing with a soft, persistent light. As the first faint streaks of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, the shimmering column around the oak began to fade. The whispers ceased. The metallic sweet scent dissipated completely. Our instruments, which had been in a frenzy of activity, slowly returned to normal readings. The valley's oppressive silence lifted, replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves, the chirping of awakening birds. It was over, the veil had opened, and we had guided its mending. I sank to my knees, utterly drained, the warden's book slipping from my numb fingers. Dr. Hansen rushed to my side, her face beaming with a mixture of exhilaration and profound relief. "You did it, Eris," she whispered, helping me to my feet. "You actually did it. You guided the veil. You saved the valley." I looked at the ancient oak, then out at the forest, now bathed in the gentle light of dawn. The trees seemed vibrant, alive, their leaves sparkling with dew. There was no sense of loss, no residual emptiness. The valley felt whole, peaceful, balanced. Now, John and Mike approached, their faces mirroring Dr. Hansen's awe. "I don't understand half of what just happened," John admitted, "but the valley feels good, clean, like a deep breath." Mike nodded. "I haven't felt it this quiet, this right, since I was a kid." We had succeeded. We had learned to be wardens, but the knowledge came with a heavy cost. We now understood the burden that Miller's line had carried, the profound responsibility. This wasn't a one-time event, it was a cycle, and we were now intrinsically linked to it. The journey back to the outpost was quiet, reflective. We had faced the impossible again, but this time with understanding and purpose. We hadn't just survived, we had actively intervened, becoming guardians of the veil. Over the next few months, our research shifted from emergency response to long-term monitoring and preparation. Dr. Hansen developed sophisticated predictive models, combining astronomical data with telluric energy readings to forecast future veil thinning events. We began to identify other potential stress fracture zones around the globe, places that historically generated similar legends of thinness or otherworldliness. The possibility of a global network of such sites, each with its own warden lineage, was a terrifying, yet logical extension of our findings. I continued to practice the symbolic sequences, honing my focus, deepening my connection to the lockets. They were no longer just pieces of silver. They felt like extensions of my will, instruments tuned to the very fabric of reality. I felt a profound sense of purpose, of being exactly where I was meant to be, however unlikely. The photographer had become a warden. The outpost expanded. More scientists, carefully vetted, joined our team. We became a clandestine unit, a hidden protectorate against unseen forces. Supervisor Evans, now fully convinced, provided us with unwavering support and resources, navigating the bureaucratic labyrinth to secure funding and secrecy. One spring afternoon, almost a year after the last Vale event, I stood on a ridge overlooking the valley, the warden's book clutched in my hand. Dr. Hansen joined me, a new, more advanced sensor array humming softly beside her. "The predictive models are showing something interesting, Eris," she said, her voice thoughtful. "Not a major thinning like the last one, not for several decades, but a subtle, localized fluctuation. A minor stress point forming about 20 miles north of here, deeper in the wilderness. It's not strong enough to draw the husks, not yet, but it's an indication, a precursor." My gaze sharpened, a new seam forming. "Or an existing one stretching," she confirmed. "The book mentions these minor ripples. They're opportunities," it says. "Opportunities to proactively mend the veil, to stabilize it before it frays into a tear." I looked at the untouched wilderness to the north, a vast expanse of forest. "The warden's duty then," I said, a grim determination in my voice, "not just to react, but to anticipate, to prevent." "It appears so," Dr. Hansen replied, her expression serious. "It's a chance to test our understanding, to apply the full scope of the book's teachings in a controlled, proactive manner, to learn if we can truly guide the veil rather than just react to its natural cycle." "Then we prepare," I said, turning away from the vista, the weight of responsibility settling firmly on my shoulders. "We learn, we adapt. The Miller Valley was just the beginning. The world is larger, and the veil, it seems, is everywhere." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of meticulous planning. This wouldn't be a reactive scramble like the last time, but a calculated, precise intervention. We studied the topographic maps, analyzed the telluric energy readings for the new stress point, and cross-referenced every detail with the warden's book. The ritual for proactive stabilization was complex, requiring a delicate balance of symbols and intent. We formed a small, specialized team. Myself as the primary warden, Dr. Hansen as lead scientific observer and ritual backup, and Mike, whose quiet competence and increasing understanding of the valley's nuances made him an invaluable security and support member. John remained at the outpost, coordinating logistics and maintaining external communications. Our equipment was streamlined, chosen for precision and stealth. I carried the warden's book, now almost an extension of myself, and the two lockets, their symbols of familiar comfort against my skin. Dr. Hansen had miniaturized her most sensitive detectors, fitting them into rugged, portable units. Mike, still carrying his rifle, also carried specialized gear for setting up perimeter sensors, and if necessary, an emergency extraction beacon. The hike to the new stress point was arduous, deep into an unmapped section of the wilderness. The terrain was steep, riddled with ancient, fallen trees and dense undergrowth. As we neared our destination, the subtle signs began to appear. A faint, almost imperceptible shift in the forest's sounds, a slight chill in the air despite the spring warmth, and a barely noticeable distortion in the light. No immediate hum, no metallic sweet scent, but the premonition was palpable. We reached a small, rocky clearing at the confluence of several ancient streams, a place of quiet, primal power. In the center, a cluster of gnarled, ancient pines, their roots interwoven over centuries, seemed to vibrate with a faint, internal energy. This was the spot. Readings are consistent with the models, Dr. Hansen whispered, checking her device. Minor telluric instability, localized electromagnetic fluctuations, but nothing extreme. No signs of husks or even their residual energy. Good, I replied, opening the warden's book to the proactive stabilization ritual. We catch it before it becomes a tear, before the hunger is called. The ritual was different this time. It wasn't about directing an existing flow of harvested essence, but about reinforcing the veil, strengthening the seam before it frayed. It involved a precise sequence of symbols designed to resonate with the Earth's natural energies, to harmonize the dimensional barrier. I began the incantation, my voice low and steady, tracing the initial symbol on the locket. I focused my intent not on fighting, but on weaving, on gently coaxing the energies of the veil back into alignment. I visualized the seam drawing tighter, growing stronger like a careful mend in a delicate fabric. The lockets pulsed with a gentle, consistent warmth. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer began to emanate from the ancient pines, not the harsh distortion of the oak, but a soft, glowing haze. The air around us felt still, expectant, but without the suffocating dread of the husks. As I moved through the symbolic sequences, speaking the archaic words, I felt the energies of the earth responding. A subtle vibration rising through the soles of my boots. The faint shimmer intensified around the pines, weaving an intricate web of light that slowly coalesced like a transparent, living tapestry between the trees. Dr. Hansen watched, utterly captivated, her instruments recording a steady increase in harmonious, energetic frequencies. "It's building," she murmured, "a positive feedback loop. You're creating a localized field that is actively stabilizing the barrier." Mike, ever vigilant, scanned the surrounding woods. Nothing approaching Aris, all clear. The ritual was a delicate dance, a slow, methodical process of intention and projection. It demanded absolute focus, absolute clarity of mind. I felt a profound connection to the ancient wardens who had developed this knowledge, to their wisdom and their dedication. I was an unlikely successor, a scientist turned shaman, but I was fulfilling a centuries-old duty. Hours passed. The sun began to set, painting the western sky in fiery hues. The energy around the pines glowed with an increasing intensity, a soft, ethereal light that dispelled the encroaching gloom. It was a beautiful, awe-inspiring sight, a testament to the unseen forces that shaped our reality. As the last rays of sunlight faded, I spoke the final invocation, tracing the last symbol, pouring my remaining intent into the lockets. The glowing tapestry around the pines flared with a brilliant, golden light, then slowly, gracefully contracted, sinking back into the trees, into the earth, until it vanished completely. The air, which had been thick with energy, felt clean, clear, and utterly normal. I stumbled back, exhausted but exhilarated. The lockets in my hand were cold once more, inert. The warden's book lay open, its mission accomplished. "It's done," I whispered, my voice hoarse. Dr. Hansen checked her instruments. Her face broke into a wide, triumphant smile. The telluric anomaly is gone, the electromagnetic fluctuations have normalized. The veil, it's strong, stronger than before. You actually mended it, Eris. You sealed the stress point. Mike lowered his rifle, a look of profound relief on his face. No more whispers, no more cold spots, just trees. We had prevented a tear. We had proactively reinforced the veil. It was a monumental achievement, a quiet victory against an invisible foe. It showed that the warden's knowledge, combined with modern scientific understanding, could truly protect the world. The quiet victory in the northern wilderness solidified our purpose. We were no longer simply reacting to a crisis. We were actively participating in the delicate, unseen balance of the world. The outpost, once a small, discreet research station, transformed into a hub of interdimensional study. Dr. Hansen's predictive models grew increasingly sophisticated, mapping the subtle shifts in telluric energy and astronomical alignments that heralded potential veil instabilities across the globe. We called these thinning forecasts, and they became our primary guide. Our team expanded, drawing in specialists from diverse fields, all carefully vetted and indoctrinated into the truth of the veil. Linguists studied the Warden's book, trying to decipher the deeper meanings behind the archaic symbols and their energetic properties. Geologists and seismologists mapped underground fault lines and mineral deposits, searching for correlations with known or predicted veil sites. Biologists examined flora and fauna in affected regions, looking for subtle changes in life energy that might indicate a lingering influence. I, meanwhile, became adept at the Warden's craft. The lockets felt more and more like extensions of my own nervous system. I could now feel the subtle pull of the veil, even when it was dormant, a faint hum beneath the surface of reality. My mind, once grounded firmly in the tangible world of photography, had learned to interpret the intangible, to speak the energetic language of the symbols. Practicing the rituals became a daily discipline, a meditative dance between intent, symbol, and energy. Our proactive mending mission in the northern wilderness had been a resounding success. It proved that we didn't just have to wait for disaster, we could prevent it. This opened up a terrifying yet exhilarating new frontier. The Warden's book, once a relic of ancient knowledge, was now a living manual for defending the fabric of reality. Months turned into a year, then two. The Miller Valley remained serene, its veil seemingly strong and stable. The proactive mend held. Our focus shifted to other potential stress fractures identified by Dr. Hansen's models. We undertook several more missions, always small, discreet, and highly coordinated, to remote locations across the continent. Each time we successfully performed the proactive stabilization ritual, reinforcing the veil before the husks could even be drawn. These missions were arduous, demanding incredible physical and mental fortitude. We trekked through desolate deserts, scaled icy mountain peaks, and navigated dense, unforgiving jungles. Each new location presented unique challenges, different geological compositions that altered the veil's energetic signature, varying atmospheric conditions that influenced symbolic projection, and sometimes unexpected encounters with wildlife or even remote human communities that required careful avoidance. During one such mission in the Arizona desert, we encountered a tribe of indigenous people who, it turned out, held their own ancient knowledge of the thin places and the shadow walkers. Their lore, passed down through generations, described guardians similar to the Wardens, who used ceremonies and sacred artifacts to maintain balance. It was a profound validation of the warden's book and a stark reminder that this phenomenon was not isolated to one valley or one lineage. We exchanged cautious information, finding common ground in our shared purpose, even if our methods differed. It was a humbling experience, expanding our understanding of the Veil's global reach and the diverse ways humanity had responded to it throughout history. Each successful intervention fueled our confidence, but also deepened my understanding of the immense ongoing responsibility. The Veil was not a problem to be solved once and for all. It was a constant living dynamic, a pulse of the universe that required continuous tending. I carried the weight of this knowledge, a quiet burden that redefined my existence. My past life as a photographer felt like a distant dream, replaced by the stark, urgent reality of my new role. Dr. Hansen, ever the scientist, continued to push the boundaries of our understanding. Her instruments, initially designed to detect anomalies, were now being adapted to measure the effectiveness of our rituals. She was slowly but surely building a scientific lexicon around the esoteric language of the warden's book, bridging the gap between ancient mysticism and modern physics. Mike and later John became indispensable members of the field team, their practical skills and unwavering loyalty crucial to our success. They learned to interpret the subtle signs of Veil activity, to move silently, and to provide unflappable support in situations that would shatter lesser men. One late autumn, nearly 3 years after my first terrifying encounter in Miller Valley, Dr. Hansen called an emergency meeting. Her face was grim, her usual scientific calm replaced by an unmistakable tension. We gathered in the briefing room at the outpost, the flickering maps of telluric energy on the main screen casting a pale glow on our faces. "We have a new thinning forecast," she began, her voice low, "but this one is different, very different." She tapped a key, and the main map zoomed in on a location none of us had ever considered. It wasn't a remote wilderness area or an ancient indigenous site. It was a densely populated region in Eastern Europe, bordering a major metropolitan area. Specifically an old, sprawling industrial complex, long abandoned, but nestled on the edge of a significant fault line and unusually high concentrations of unique mineral deposits. "The models predict a severe stress fracture," Dr. Hansen explained, pointing to a pulsating red zone on the map. "Not just a minor ripple, a major Veil event, on par with or even exceeding what happened in Miller Valley, and it's set to occur in less than a month." A stunned silence filled the room. This was a nightmare scenario. All our previous missions had been in isolated, sparsely populated areas. The idea of a major Veil event, a full-blown husks harvesting cycle, occurring on the doorstep of millions of people was unthinkable. "How could this happen?" I asked, my voice tight. "We've been monitoring these global hot zones. This wasn't on our radar as a primary threat." "It appears to be an accelerated manifestation," Dr. Hansen replied, her brow furrowed. "The unique combination of geological factors here, coupled with something else, it's creating an unprecedented instability. The book mentions rare instances where human activity, particularly large-scale industrial endeavors or catastrophic events, can either exacerbate or even trigger a Veil instability." She zoomed in further on the complex. It was a relic of the Cold War, a massive, decaying labyrinth of concrete, rusting steel, and abandoned machinery. Its history was rife with rumors of strange experiments, accidents, and unexplained disappearances, all dismissed as Cold War paranoia. This complex was apparently the site of some highly experimental research during the Soviet era, Dr. Hansen continued. Allegedly, they were dabbling in exotic energy sources, quantum physics, even some less conventional fields of study. There's fragmented intelligence suggesting they were trying to tap into deep Earth energies, perhaps even attempting to open pathways to other dimensions for military purposes. They were trying to open the veil, John murmured, his face pale. Precisely, Dr. Hansen confirmed. It seems they succeeded, at least partially. They created a localized, artificial thinness. But they didn't understand what they were unleashing. And now, decades later, their efforts are coming to fruition, aligning with natural telluric shifts to create a perfect storm. The implications were horrifying. This wasn't just a natural cycle anymore. It was a consequence of reckless human intervention, an ancient horror amplified by modern hubris. The wardens had always dealt with the natural world. This was something entirely new. A full-scale Veil event in a populated area, Mike said, shaking his head. The husks, they wouldn't be able to distinguish between deer and people. The casualties would be catastrophic. Not to mention the panic, the chaos, the global exposure of the Veil, I added, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. We can't let this happen. Our standard proactive stabilization ritual might not be enough, Dr. Hansen warned. The book describes specific, more aggressive interventions for human-influenced Veil events, particularly when there's residual artificial energy. It's a riskier, more intense ritual designed not just to mend, but to seal and neutralize the artificial elements. It demands a much greater energetic output from the warden, and carries significant risks of feedback and energetic backlash. I looked at the map at the red pulsating zone over the forgotten industrial complex. Then we prepare for the aggressive intervention, I stated, my voice firm. We have the book, we have the knowledge, we have to try. Supervisor Evans, contacted via a secure satellite line, listened to Dr. Hansen's briefing with grim determination. The sheer scale of the potential disaster, coupled with the geopolitical implications, made this mission paramount. It would require unprecedented coordination with international agencies, covert operations, and in layers of diplomatic deception. We couldn't just march into a sovereign nation and declare we were preventing an interdimensional invasion. We'll need to establish a cover story, Supervisor Evans said, her voice taut. A major environmental remediation project, cleaning up decades of Cold War-era industrial pollution. It's plausible given the site's history. That will give us access and a reason for a large, specialized team. The logistical challenges were immense. We couldn't use our usual small, discrete field team. This required a much larger operation with scientists, engineers, and a substantial security detail. Each member would need to be briefed on a need-to-know basis, with only the core team, myself, Dr. Hansen, John, and Mike, fully aware of the true nature of the mission. Preparations began immediately. Our outpost became a hive of activity. Dr. Hansen and her linguists pored over the warden's book, identifying the specific symbols and sequences for the aggressive veil neutralization ritual. It was a complex, almost violent energetic manipulation, designed to forcibly reintegrate the frayed dimensional fabric and neutralize any residual artificial energies. The book warned of intense psychic and physical strain on the warden, and the potential for severe energetic feedback if not executed perfectly. I spent every waking hour practicing, honing my focus, strengthening my energetic connection to the lockets. The symbols, when activated for this ritual, felt different, sharper, more forceful, like blades rather than gentle weaves. I visualized the massive industrial complex, the millions of lives on its periphery, and channeled my fear into an unshakable resolve. I had to succeed. Dr. Hansen, meanwhile, designed new, powerful detection equipment capable of mapping the intricate layers of both natural and artificial veil energy. We also developed specialized shielding and dampening fields, hoping to protect our team from the energetic backlash the book described. The journey to Eastern Europe was a covert operation of staggering complexity. We flew in under multiple layers of diplomatic cover, our equipment disguised as environmental remediation gear. The chosen site, known locally as the Krasna Zvezda, Red Star Industrial Zone, was even more desolate and haunting than the satellite images suggested. It was a wasteland of collapsed buildings, toxic sludge, and skeletal machinery, shrouded in a perpetual, unsettling silence. As we neared the core of the complex, the subtle signs of veil activity began to manifest. Compasses spun wildly, electronics fritzed, and a pervasive low-frequency hum resonated through the ground. The air grew heavy, thick with the metallic sweet scent I now recognized as the harbinger of the husks. But this time it was laced with something else, a bitter, acrid tang like ozone and burning circuits, a testament to the artificial energies at play. "Readings are off the charts, Aris," Dr. Hansen reported, her voice hushed, her face illuminated by the flashing red lights of her main console. We had established a mobile command center in a reinforced lead-line transport container, several kilometers from the predicted epicenter. The veil is fraying rapidly, and the artificial energy signature, it's massive, a resonant frequency cascade. It's exactly as the book described. The core team, clad in specialized hazmat-like suits designed to offer some protection against both the harsh environment and potential energetic exposure, moved towards the epicenter. John and Mike led the security detail, their faces grim but resolute. They had seen enough to trust our judgment, even when it defied logic. The epicenter was a cavernous, subterranean research facility, accessed through a massive, rusted blast door half buried in rubble. Inside, the air was cold and stagnant, reeking of decay and the acrid artificial energy. Twisted wires, shattered consoles, and half-melted machinery hinted at a catastrophic failure decades ago. In the center of the main chamber, a massive lead-shielded reactor core, its housing cracked and leaking, pulsed with a sickly green light. It was the heart of the artificial instability. "This is it," Dr. Hansen whispered, her voice filled with awe and dread. "The source of the amplification, the point where they tried to tear the seam." The veil's thinness here was almost visible. The air shimmered violently, distorting our vision. Shadows stretched and contracted independently of light sources, and the whispers, they were no longer a subtle murmur. They were a chorus, a rising tide of sibilant hunger emanating from the very walls, from the very air itself. "They're here," Mike said, his rifle raised, his eyes scanning the chaotic shadows. "Hundreds of them, maybe thousands." I clutched the lockets, their cold silver now burning against my skin. The aggressive veil neutralization ritual. This wasn't just about guiding. It was about severing, about forcibly realigning. The book's warnings echoed in my mind. "All right," I said, my voice cutting through the rising whispers. "Everyone, activate your dampening fields. Focus on the core. We need to neutralize the artificial amplification first, then mend the veil." As I opened the warden's book, the symbols on the lockets flared with a searing, white-hot light. I began the first incantation, my voice resonating with an unfamiliar power. I traced the symbol for severance onto the locket, visualizing the artificial energies within the reactor core being ripped away, torn from the veil's fabric. A violent shudder ripped through the facility. The green light from the reactor core flickered, then intensified, pulsing with a furious, erratic rhythm. The whispers of the husks rose to a crescendo, a cacophony of enraged, desperate hunger. Dark shapes, no longer indistinct, writhed in the shimmering air, coalescing into terrifying, elongated forms. "They're reacting," Dr. Hansen shouted over the din, her instruments screaming. Massive energy surged from the husks, they're fighting back. The ground beneath us vibrated violently. Cracks appeared in the reinforced concrete, debris rained down from the ceiling. John and Mike struggled to maintain their footing, their weapons useless against the ethereal forms now swarming around us. The protective suits glowed faintly as the dampening field struggled against the overwhelming energetic pressure. I pushed harder, pouring every ounce of my will into the locket, into the symbol. The severance ritual was designed to cause an energetic shockwave to forcefully dislodge the parasitic artificial connection. I felt a searing pain in my chest, as if my own life force was being ripped from me, my vision blurred. "Eris," Dr. Hansen cried, rushing to my side, her hand bracing my arm. "You're overloading, you have to pace yourself." But there was no time for pacing. The husks were pressing in, their cold presence draining the air, the warmth, the very life from the chamber. I could feel their hunger, a vast alien void that threatened to consume everything. With a final, desperate surge of will, I completed the severance sequence. The lockets flared with an almost blinding light. A deafening crack echoed through the chamber, and the green light from the reactor core imploded, collapsing inward with a sickening crunch. The artificial energies, like a severed limb, withered and died, leaving behind only a husk of cold, inert metal. The husks recoiled, their whispers momentarily silenced, their forms dissipating like smoke. The intense pressure on our dampening fields eased, but the veil itself, the dimensional seam, was still frayed, still vulnerable. The artificial connection was gone, but the tear remained. "Now the mending," I gasped, sweat pouring down my face, my entire body trembling with the aftershocks of the energetic feedback. The harmonic reintegration sequence. Fast. This was the delicate part, the weaving. After the violent severance, the veil needed to be gently coaxed back into alignment. I flipped the book to the next page, my hands shaking. The symbols were intricate, fluid, designed to resonate with the Earth's natural energies. I began the chant, my voice weak at first, then gaining strength as I focused. I traced the harmonic reintegration symbol, pouring my intent into a calming, healing flow. I visualized the frayed edges of the veil drawing together, not forcibly, but gently, finding their natural balance. The husks, though temporarily dispersed, were not gone. They began to reform, drawn once more to the open seam. But this time they seemed less aggressive, more confused. Without the artificial amplification, their hunger was diffuse, undirected. "They're seeking direction," Dr. Hansen realized, scanning her instruments. "The veil is open, but unstable. They don't know where to go." "Then we guide them," I gritted out, forcing myself to stand taller. "Towards the inert, towards the spent energy. The book says the abandoned machinery, the residual radiation in the rock." The warden's book described channeling the husks towards sources of inert, non-living energy, effectively using them as energetic recyclers, drawing the raw energy from their surroundings to mend the veil. It was a sophisticated form of energetic waste management. I shifted my focus, tracing the symbol for inert conversion. I directed my intent towards the vast quantities of decaying machinery, the toxic sludge, the spent radiation saturating the earth around us. I willed the husks to feed on that, to transmute it into the essence needed to repair the veil. Slowly, incredibly, the husks responded. Their shadowy forms elongated, thinning, and began to drift, not towards us, but towards the surrounding derelict complex. Their whispers, instead of being a hungry chorus, transformed into a low, resonant hum like vast, unseen generators powering up. The metallic sweet scent mixed with the acrid artificial tang then slowly began to morph, acquiring a cleaner, more earthy aroma like ozone and raw stone. "It's working!" Dr. Hansen exclaimed, her voice filled with renewed hope. "The husks are absorbing the residual artificial energy. They're converting it into stable veil essence. The readings are normalizing." Hours passed in a trance-like state. I continued the ritual, moving through the complex sequences, guiding the husks through the vast abandoned facility, directing them to every pocket of residual energy, every toxic corner. It was an exhausting, deeply immersive process. I felt a connection not just to the veil, but to the husks themselves, to their essential role as cosmic recyclers. I was a shepherd, guiding an alien flock to mend a tear in reality. As the first faint light of dawn filtered through the gaping holes in the facility's ceiling, the last of the husks dissolved into the earth, their low hum fading into silence. The air, once thick with dread and the acrid stench, felt clean, crisp, almost purified. The shimmering distortions vanished. The silence that remained was the natural silence of a place at rest, not the oppressive stillness of the veil. I collapsed, utterly spent, the lockets cold and inert once more against my skin. Dr. Hansen and Mike were immediately at my side, helping me up, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and immense relief. "It's done," Dr. Hansen whispered, checking her instruments. "The veil, it's completely stabilized. The artificial energy signature is gone. The stress fracture is gone, stronger than before even." John, who had been coordinating from the mobile command center, entered the chamber, his face pale but relieved. "The external sensors are back online. All communications are restored. The tremors have stopped. Whatever happened, it's over." We had averted disaster. We had mended a human-made tear, not just a natural fraying. The warden's knowledge, combined with modern science, had saved millions. The mission was a resounding success, but it came with a new, terrifying implication. "This changes everything," I said, my voice hoarse, looking around the now calm, eerily silent chamber. "The veil isn't just a natural phenomenon. It can be influenced, manipulated by us and by others." Dr. Hansen nodded slowly, her expression grim. "The Cold War experiments here, they were just scratching the surface. What if other groups, other nations have also dabbled in these energies? What if they're still out there, trying to unlock the veil's secrets without understanding the devastating consequences?" The thought sent a chill down my spine. We had prevented a catastrophe, but we had also stumbled upon a far greater, more pervasive threat. The veil was not just a cosmic membrane, it was a battleground, a hidden front in a global struggle for power and understanding. And we, the quiet protectors, were now squarely in the crosshairs. The next few months were a blur of debriefings, data analysis, and strategic planning. The Krasna Zvezda incident remained classified under layers of environmental remediation and Cold War cover-ups. The scientific and geopolitical implications were immense. We had proven that a veil event, even an artificially induced one, could be contained and mended. But we had also unearthed the terrifying possibility that humanity itself could be a vector for future ruptures. Our team, now expanded and operating under an even deeper veil of secrecy, began to investigate historical and contemporary rumors of similar exotic energy experiments worldwide. We combed through declassified intelligence reports, fringe scientific papers, and even local legends from areas known for their strange disappearances or environmental anomalies. The search for other artificial veil sites became our new priority. I continued to hone my skills, becoming more attuned to the subtle currents of the veil. The lockets felt like extensions of my very soul, their symbols a language I now spoke fluently. The responsibility was immense, but so was the sense of purpose. I was no longer just a scientist or a photographer. I was a guardian, a warden of reality itself. Dr. Hansen, with her unique blend of scientific rigor and open-mindedness, proved an invaluable partner. She was developing a new generation of predictive models, specifically designed to identify artificial veil disturbances, taking into account not just geological and astronomical factors, but also historical human activity. One evening, nearly a year after the Krasna Zvezda mission, Dr. Hansen called me into her private office at the outpost. The room was dark, save for the glow of her monitors, which displayed a complex web of data. Her face was etched with a familiar tension. "Eris," she began, her voice low and serious. "My models have identified something, a pattern. It's not a natural thinning, and it's not a residual artificial signature like Krasna Zvezda." She zoomed in on a section of the global map. It highlighted several seemingly disparate locations: a remote research station in Antarctica, a hidden base deep in the Amazon rainforest, and a heavily fortified island facility in the Pacific. All were known or suspected sites of highly advanced, often covert, scientific research. These sites, Dr. Hansen continued, are showing incredibly subtle, synchronized energetic fluctuations. They're not veil openings, they're not even stress fractures, it's something else, like highly focused, localized energetic pulses, all emanating from these facilities, all on different continents, but all showing the same unique frequency signature. My blood ran cold. "They're experimenting," I whispered, the terrifying implication dawning on me. Someone is not just dabbling, but actively trying to understand and control the veil. They're using the same principles we do, but for a different purpose. "Exactly," Dr. Hansen confirmed, her gaze fixed on the pulsing data. "The frequency signature, it has elements of the wardens' symbols. It's a highly distorted, almost corrupted version of the severance sequence we used at Krasna Zvezda, but it's being used differently. Not to mend, but to manipulate, to pull something through, or to send something across." The warden's book contained ominous warnings about those who would seek to exploit the veil, not to protect it. It spoke of shadow weavers, individuals who learned to bend the veil to their own will, often with disastrous consequences. They were not just reckless scientists, they were dangerous, knowledgeable adversaries. "They're trying to open pathways," I said, my mind racing. "Not just for the husks, but for something else. Something they want to bring through, or something they want to send into another dimension." "Or they're trying to weaponize it," Dr. Hansen finished, her voice barely a whisper. "To turn the veil itself into a weapon. And given the nature of the site's advanced, military-funded research facilities, that's the most terrifying scenario of all." We were facing an entirely new kind of threat, not just the impersonal, natural hunger of the veil, but a calculated, intelligent adversary who understood its secrets and sought to harness its power. This wasn't about mending anymore. It was about prevention, and perhaps even confrontation. We need to find out who they are, I declared, my resolve hardening, and what they're trying to do before they succeed. Dr. Hansen nodded, her eyes narrowing with grim determination. We're already tracking the energy signatures, but these facilities are heavily secured. Infiltrating them will be a significant challenge, and if they possess knowledge of the Veil, they'll likely be prepared for anomalies. The next phase of our mission was clear. We had to go on the offensive. We had to uncover the identity of these shadow weavers and stop them before they unleashed an unimaginable horror upon the world. The quiet protection of the Veil was over. The battle for its future and the future of reality itself was about to begin. Our team, now codenamed the Wardens Initiative, began to operate on a truly global scale. Our network of contacts expanded, reaching into the highest echelons of covert intelligence agencies and international organizations. Supervisor Evans, now deeply invested in our work, moved mountains to provide the necessary resources and diplomatic clearances for what would inevitably be highly sensitive, potentially illegal, incursions into sovereign territories. We spent weeks analyzing the energy signatures, cross-referencing them with the Warden's book, trying to decipher the intent behind the distorted symbolic sequences. It was like reverse engineering a spell, trying to understand not just the words, but the grammar and syntax of a new, dangerous language. The recurring elements, Dr. Hansen pointed out during one intense session, tapping a glowing diagram on her screen, they're consistent with what the book calls transference gates. Symbols designed not for a broad veil opening, but for a highly focused, directional exchange between dimensions, like a targeted portal. A portal for what? I asked, my stomach churning. The book doesn't specify, she replied, her brows furrowed in concentration. Only that such gates are inherently unstable and can draw undesirable entities or release dangerous energies if not perfectly controlled. And these signatures, they are far from perfectly controlled. They're sloppy, dangerous, and escalating. Our intelligence suggested the Antarctica Research Station, known only by its designation Site Alpha 7, was the most active. Rumors hinted at experiments involving dark matter, exotic particles, and even attempts at communication with extraterrestrial intelligences. It seemed like a prime candidate for reckless veil manipulation. We need to go to Antarctica, I decided. It's remote enough for a covert entry, and the activity there is escalating fastest. If they're trying to open a transference gate, we need to stop them before they succeed. The planning for Site Alpha 7 was meticulous. We assembled a specialized infiltration team, myself as the primary warden, Dr. Hansen as lead analyst and energetic backup, John and Mike as security and tactical support, and two new additions, a former Special Forces operative named Anya, whose stealth and combat skills were legendary, and a brilliant, if eccentric, ex-hacker named Jax, who could bypass any digital defense. Our cover was a deep-sea research expedition, complete with a specially equipped icebreaker and a team of marine biologists who were, in reality, highly trained operatives. The journey to the remote Antarctic ice shelf was long and fraught with tension. The desolate, frozen landscape felt both eerily beautiful and profoundly hostile. As we approached Site Alpha 7, Dr. Hansen's instruments began to pick up the telltale energy fluctuations. They were subtle at first, masked by the sheer scale of the natural electromagnetic noise of the pole, but then grew steadily stronger, sharper, acquiring the distinct, corrupted resonance of the transference gate symbols. "They're actively attempting activation," Dr. Hansen reported, her voice hushed. "The energy output is peaking. They're very close to achieving a breakthrough." Our infiltration was a masterpiece of stealth and coordination. Under the cover of a raging blizzard, Anya and Jax disabled the perimeter sensors and security cameras. John and Mike neutralized the exterior patrols with silent precision. We moved through the vast, sterile corridors of Site Alpha 7, a ghostly procession in the dim emergency lighting, our breath misting in the frigid air. The facility was a labyrinth of laboratories, data centers, and advanced energy conduits. Jax worked furiously, bypassing security systems, guiding us deeper into the complex. The air grew thick with the familiar metallic sweet scent, but it was mixed with something new, something profoundly alien, a faint, almost imperceptible hum that vibrated in our bones, a cold resonance that promised something vast and utterly inhuman. "They're in the main research chamber," Jax whispered, pointing to a schematic on his tablet. "Deepest level, maximum security." As we descended, the energy fluctuations intensified. The walls pulsed with a faint, internal glow, like veins of alien light. The whispers, always a harbinger of the husks, were replaced by a single, focused thought, a sensation of immense, hungry presence on the other side of a rapidly thinning barrier. This wasn't the undirected hunger of the husks. This was something intelligent, something waiting. We reached the main research chamber. It was vast, dominated by a massive, circular platform at its center. Above it, a complex array of energy emitters and focusing lenses converged on a single point, where the air shimmered and distorted, not with the natural veil energy, but with a highly concentrated, artificial instability. It pulsed with a sickening, greenish-purple light. Surrounding the platform were dozens of scientists and armed guards, all oblivious to our presence. A stern-faced man in a pristine white lab coat, clearly the lead scientist, stood on the platform overseeing the final preparations. He held a small, intricate device in his hand, emblazoned with a familiar yet distorted set of symbols. It was a warden's locket, corrupted, twisted to a different purpose. "They have a locket," I gasped, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "They're using a locket or something like it to activate the gate." "It appears to be a reverse-engineered replica," Dr. Hansen murmured, her eyes wide with scientific shock. "But it's functional. They're using it to focus the energy to open the transference gate." The lead scientist raised his locket, his voice echoing through the chamber, speaking a corrupted version of the warden's language, a profane incantation designed not to mend but to tear. As he spoke, the green-purple shimmer intensified, spiraling inward, creating a miniature vortex of pure, raw dimensional energy. "The gate is opening," Dr. Hansen shouted, her voice filled with urgency. "They're going to pull something through." This was it, the ultimate horror, a weaponized veil. "We stop them now," I yelled, drawing the warden's lockets, their symbols blazing with a righteous, furious light. Anya, Mike, John, Jax, neutralize the personnel. Dr. Hansen, get ready for a full counter-ritual. I'm taking down that gate. Our team erupted into action. Anya moved like a ghost, disabling guards with swift, silent strikes. John and Mike engaged the remaining security forces, their movements precise and deadly. Jax, with uncanny speed, began hacking into the facility's power grid, seeking to disrupt the energy flow to the transference gate. I leaped onto the central platform, directly confronting the lead scientist. He turned, his eyes wide with surprise, then narrowed with a flicker of recognition as he saw my lockets. "The warden," he hissed, his voice laced with both disdain and grudging respect. "You dare interfere with true progress. You dare open a gate to oblivion," I retorted, channeling my intent. I focused on his corrupted locket, on the twisted energy it emanated. The warden's book had a ritual for energetic disarmament, for severing a malevolent connection to the veil. I began the counter-incantation, projecting the symbol for reclamation towards his device. The air crackled between us. His locket pulsed with dark energy, struggling against my pure, focused intent. The transference gate behind him wavered, its green-purple vortex sputtering. "Fool," he snarled, pushing back with his own corrupted energy. "You cannot stop us. We will bring forth the architects of true power." But I was a warden. I carried the true knowledge, the accumulated wisdom of centuries. My lockets flared, mirroring the true symbols, pure and uncorrupted. The power coursed through me, a surge of righteous energy. I pushed back harder, visualizing the true purpose of the veil, its delicate balance, its sacred trust. With a shriek of the ancient, uncorrupted symbols, a wave of pure, concentrated energy surged from my lockets, tearing through the lead scientist's corrupted device. His locket shattered in his hand, fragments of silver and dark crystal scattering across the platform. The scientist staggered back, clutching his hand, his face contorted in a scream of agony and disbelief. The green-purple vortex of the transference gate sputtered violently, shrinking, then violently collapsing inward with a sound like tearing fabric. A blinding flash of pure, white light erupted from the epicenter, throwing us all backward. The chamber plunged into momentary darkness, filled only with the afterimage of the flash and the ringing in my ears. The hum, the cold resonance, and the overwhelming sense of hungry presence vanished, replaced by a profound, echoing silence. When my vision cleared, I saw the lead scientist sprawled on the platform, unconscious, his hand still bleeding from the shattered locket. The massive energy emitters and focusing lenses around the platform were sparking and smoking, their sophisticated mechanisms fried. The air, though still frigid, no longer held the alien taint. Eris, Dr. Hansen, was at my side, her face pale. "Are you all right?" I nodded, feeling a profound exhaustion, but also a surge of triumph. The lockets in my hand were cool, quiet once more. "It's gone," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "The gate is sealed, nothing came through." Our team quickly secured the chamber. Anya and John had incapacitated the remaining guards while Mike swept for any lingering threats. Jax, having successfully cut off the main power, was now working to restore minimal lighting and emergency systems. "Report," Dr. Hansen commanded, her scientific mind already shifting from crisis to analysis. "All hostiles neutralized or incapacitated," John reported, checking the lead scientist for injuries. "No immediate threats." "Power systems critically damaged," Jax chimed in from a console. "I cut the main feeds to the gate, but the feedback blew out most of the grid. It'll take days to get this place fully operational again, which I assume is the point." Dr. Hansen knelt beside the remains of the transference gate, her instruments scanning the residual energy. "The localized dimensional distortion is gone," she confirmed, a note of awe in her voice. The veil has reintegrated, stronger than before even. You didn't just close it, Eris, you fundamentally repaired it, neutralized their destructive intent. I looked at the unconscious lead scientist, a man who had been so close to unleashing an unknown horror. His face, even in repose, held a chilling fanaticism. "Who are they, Dr. Hansen?" I asked, the question heavy with dread. "And what were they trying to bring through?" "We'll find out," she replied, her expression grim. "We'll interrogate him, search their data. This facility must hold answers." The next few days at Site Alpha 7 were a whirlwind of activity. Our team worked tirelessly, securing the facility, sifting through mountains of data, and debriefing the captured personnel. The lead scientist, identified as Dr. Nikolai Volkov, was a brilliant but deeply disturbed physicist, obsessed with transcending human limitations through interdimensional travel. Under rigorous interrogation, Dr. Volkov, after initial defiance, eventually cracked. He revealed that he was part of a clandestine organization, a global collective of scientists, philosophers, and military strategists known as the Aperture Collective. Their goal was to harness the Veil's power, not to protect it, but to exploit it. They believed that beyond the Veil lay advanced knowledge, untapped energy, and even sentient entities capable of accelerating humanity's evolution. They referred to these entities as the architects, beings of immense power and intellect, whose whispers they claimed to have heard through rudimentary Veil manipulations. Volkov confessed that the locket he possessed was a painstakingly reverse-engineered replica, based on ancient texts and artifacts they had acquired, fragmented pieces of warden lore. They had been trying to create a stable, two-way transference gate for years, perfecting the corrupted symbols and rituals. Site Alpha 7 was their most advanced experimental hub, a place where they believed the thinness of the polar veil, combined with their artificial amplification, would allow for the first full-scale architect manifestation. They believe the husks are just primitive energetic constructs, Dr. Hansen explained to me later, her voice filled with disgust. The architects, they claim, are on a higher plane waiting to communicate to guide us. And what exactly did they plan to bring through? I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. Volkov was vague, almost delirious when describing them, she admitted. He spoke of beings of pure thought, of impossible geometries, of knowledge that would reshape reality itself. He saw himself as a prophet, opening the door for humanity's next great leap. The implications were staggering. The Aperture Collective was not a rogue state or a singular mad scientist. It was a well-funded, globally networked organization, operating in the shadows, pursuing a dangerous agenda with a twisted understanding of the Veil. They had other sites, other experiments, other scientists like Volkov. Jax, meanwhile, had unearthed a trove of data from Site Alpha 7 servers. Encrypted communications, detailed schematics, and experimental logs painted a terrifying picture. The collective had indeed identified other veil-thinning areas, including the Miller Valley, and had been observing our initial reactive interventions with great interest, unaware that we were the true wardens. Our proactive mendings had confused and frustrated them, as they sought to exploit natural veil activity. They've been using a network of deep space telescopes combined with advanced quantum sensors to predict veil instabilities, Jax reported, his fingers flying across a holographic display. They're incredibly sophisticated, They even have their own rudimentary predictive models for thin places, though they're not as accurate as Dr. Hansen's. They're a mirror image of us, I realized, the thought chilling me, but twisted. They've discovered the same truths but come to the opposite conclusion: to exploit, not protect. The most disturbing discovery was a series of experimental logs detailing architect communication attempts. Volkov's team had been receiving garbled psychic transmissions through the partially opened gate, which they interpreted as benevolent guidance. But Dr. Hansen, cross-referencing these logs with the warden's book, had a different, far more unsettling interpretation. These architects, Eris, I believe they are not benevolent guides, Dr. Hansen explained, her voice grave. The book describes entities that exist beyond the veil, not the husks, but something else entirely. It calls them void dwellers. It says they are drawn to open gates not out of benevolence, but out of a parasitic hunger for dimensional energy, for the raw essence of reality itself. They whisper promises of power and knowledge to those who would open the way, corrupting their minds, guiding them to tear the veil further. They're manipulators, I concluded, the puzzle pieces clicking into place. They feed on the energy of open gates, and they use humans as pawns to create those gates. Precisely, she confirmed. The architects are a lie, the void dwellers are real, and they are far more dangerous than the husks. The husks are a natural, albeit brutal, part of the veil's cycle. The void dwellers are an invasive species, a cancer that seeks to consume reality. The implications were catastrophic. We weren't just fighting a group of misguided scientists. We were fighting a sophisticated, interdimensional threat that manipulated humans for its own ends. The Aperture Collective was a cult, unknowingly serving as agents for these parasitic void dwellers. Supervisor Evans was briefed on the full scope of the discovery. Her response was immediate and unequivocal. The Aperture Collective represented an existential threat. Our mission expanded from protection to proactive elimination of their threat. This becomes a global, covert war, Supervisor Evans declared during a secure video conference. We cannot allow these void dwellers a foothold in our dimension, and we cannot allow the collective to continue opening gates. Our next targets were clear. The other two primary Aperture Collective sites identified by Dr. Hansen's models and confirmed by Volkov's data, the Amazon Rainforest Base and the Pacific Island Facility. But first, we needed to consolidate our findings, understand the collective's operational structure, and develop a strategy to dismantle their network. The Site Alpha 7 operation, though successful in preventing a major dimensional breach, was merely the opening salvo in a much larger conflict. The return journey from Antarctica was filled with a new sense of urgency and dread. We were no longer just wardens, we were soldiers in an unseen war. Back at the outpost, our team intensified its efforts. Jax, with his incredible hacking skills, began to map the Aperture Collective's digital footprint. He uncovered a sophisticated dark web network, encrypted forums, and clandestine financial channels. The collective was deeply embedded in corporate, scientific, and even some governmental structures, funding their operations through shell companies and leveraging their advanced knowledge for technological advantages. Dr. Hansen, working with the newly acquired data, refined her predictive models to specifically identify Aperture Collective transference gate attempts. She also began to study the nature of the void dwellers, trying to understand their weaknesses, their energetic signatures, and their true intentions beyond the promises of power. The Warden's book, previously focused on natural veil mending, now revealed hidden chapters detailing ancient battles against these shadow weavers and the entities they served. I, meanwhile, trained relentlessly. The confrontation with Volkov had shown me the destructive potential of corrupted veil energies. I needed to be stronger, faster, more precise. I practiced not just the mending rituals, but also the energetic disarmament and veil severance techniques, adapting them for broader applications. The lockets became extensions of my being, responding to my intent with increasing fluidity. John, Mike, and Anya established specialized training regimens for close-quarters combat against human adversaries and protocols for securing veil-compromised zones. The concept of energetic dampening became crucial, protecting our operatives from the debilitating effects of open gates. Our intelligence suggested that the Amazonian base, codenamed Site Gaia, was the next closest to achieving a stable transference gate. Located deep within an uncontacted region of the rainforest, it was chosen for its isolation and its unique telluric energy signature, which the collective believed was particularly conducive to architect manifestations. The infiltration of Site Gaia was dramatically different from Antarctica. Instead of blizzards and sterile corridors, we faced dense jungle, oppressive humidity, and a suffocating canopy that blocked out the sun. The collective's security was enhanced, likely due to the loss of Site Alpha 7. Motion sensors, infrared tripwires, and heavily armed patrols were everywhere. Our team, clad in specialized camouflage gear, navigated the treacherous terrain. Jax provided invaluable real-time intelligence, mapping the complex's layout and security grid through hacked drones. Anya, with her unparalleled stealth, moved silently ahead, neutralizing external threats. As we neared the core facility, the air grew thick and heavy, not with the cold resonance of Antarctica, but with a stifling, unnatural warmth. The metallic sweet scent of the husks was present, stronger than before, but now laced with a sickly, floral aroma, a perversion of the jungle's natural perfume. And the whispers, they were more insidious here, slithering into our minds like venom, promising secrets, power, and end to suffering. They're actively transmitting Void Dweller's influence, Dr. Hansen whispered, checking her portable sensors. This isn't just a gate opening, they're broadcasting their whispers, trying to corrupt anyone nearby. It's a psychic assault. The main facility at Site Gaia was hidden beneath a massive, reinforced canopy disguised as natural vegetation. Inside, it was a high-tech marvel, powered by geothermal energy, pulsating with lights and the whir of advanced machinery. The core research chamber was a massive biodome, filled with exotic, bioluminescent flora. In the center, a colossal crystal matrix pulsed with a sickening, vibrant